Okay. Thank you so much for your patience. I'm sorry that we're starting later today. Our executive session ran long. It is Tuesday, September 13th. I'd like to ask for a roll call to establish quorum, please.
Dr. Ravi,
Here.
Ms. Shaw,
Here.
Ms. Counts, Ms. Luna Rose, and Ms. Grijalva.
Here, thank you. So our land acknowledgement is going to be read by Jean Armstrong, who in November will be with TUSD for 20 years. Can you go ahead and read that, Jean?
On behalf of the Governing Board of the Tucson Unified School District, I, Gene Armstrong, acknowledge that the schools, buildings, and facilities of the Tucson Unified School District reside on the ancestral homeland of the Tohono O'odham Nation and the federally recognized tribal land of the Pascua Yaqui tribe.
Thank you for reading that, Jean. I appreciate it. Now we're on Pledge of Allegiance. And do we have Everardo Ruiz Torres on the line? Oh, there you are.
Yes.
Hi, Everardo. How are you?
Hi. Good?
Good. I'm going to read a little bit about you. Everardo is in 4th grade at Leonard Quiles Elementary School. Everardo enjoys playing soccer and basketball, but most of all, he likes playing video games. He's a great student and a great leader. Thank you for joining us, Everardo. Well, we are ready for you to lead us in the pledge whenever you are. They're going to put that flag up. So we'll stand, and then you just start whenever you're ready.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Everardo, and thank you so much for taking time out of your evening to join us in reading the pledge. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Now we're on agenda adjustments, Dr. Trujillo.
President Grijalva, members of the governing board, there are no agenda adjustment recommendations this evening.
Okay. And we do have interpreting services available. ¿Alguien que necesita los servicios de un intérprete? Okay. I'll try again at the beginning of the call to the audience. Okay, now we're on superintendent report. Dr. Trujillo.
Yes, President Grijalva, members of the governing board, TUSD community, welcome to our first meeting here in September. Certainly hope everybody had a wonderful 3-day weekend for Labor Day. And we, of course, use Labor Day to celebrate the longstanding commitment that we have to collaboration, communication, and partnership with our wonderful employee associations throughout the district. First update this evening, wanted to give a brief word on COVID mitigation. COVID-19 infections still continue to present a disruption to the operations of the district when our employees do go out sick. We have to cover their areas. So we want to do everything can to make sure that our employees are keeping themselves and their loved ones healthy. The new COVID-19 booster shot is now widely available across the state of Arizona and certainly here in Pima County. We certainly encourage anybody that wants the shot needs to know that the Pfizer version is available for individuals that are 12 or over, while the Moderna version is available for individuals 18 or over. Adherence to our mitigation efforts, particularly around the cleanliness of our facilities, hand washing, and the decision to stay home when ill will continue to be a priority and a focus for all of our employees. And important announcement, we know we've received a lot of emails from a lot of our club sponsors and a lot of our coaches. We want to go ahead and make sure and reiterate and emphasize the communication that we sent out earlier this week. There are no longer any restrictions for our student groups, clubs, or teams seeking to travel either in-state, out-of-state, or even international. All of those restrictions have been lifted. Tonight, the governing board will take up policy GBGCC. Tonight, it is up for revision, specifically to bring the district into compliance with the requirements of the new law, HB 2616. HB 2616, of course, takes effect on September 25th, and tonight represents the administration's recommendation to put a modified policy in front of our governing board that would be aligned to the new law. Some good news for career and technical education programs throughout the district. The administration, we are going to be investing over $1 million of our JTED carry forward funding for renovations and equipment, facilities upgrades to CTE programs around the district. Just like the governing board in its regular maintenance and operations budget has carry forward funds from time to time, we also have the same carry forward funding taking place with JTED funding that the district receives to support new and existing career and technical education programs throughout the district. The process is a little different. In order for us to be able to access those excess funds, we need JTED's approval. And they issue approval through project proposals and requests targeted towards supporting existing or new career and technical education programs. So our expenditure request features 10 projects at 7 different schools with some very, very impressive large-scale projects. Leading the way is a comprehensive renovation of the Catalina Culinary Arts Facility. We are very, very excited about this project. It will be a totally brand new, renovated cooking and food preparation area as well as kitchen. We're also very excited about the renovations scheduled for the Tucson High TV and Film Lab, and as well as the construction of a new instructional pharmacy lab at Saguaro High School and the complete renovation of the pharmacy tech and sports medicine facilities at Choya. So we are very, very excited about these investments and, of course, invite our governing board members to take a look at these new areas once construction is complete. We're also excited to announce that the Department of Economic Security's Child Care Workforce Stabilization Grant has been awarded to the Tucson Unified School District. Our community schools programs, which are the programs that feature before and after school programs for our families throughout the district, which are currently free of cost and will be the entirety of this year, as well as our early childhood education program, our pre-K programs. They've been awarded $6.3 million through this Child Care Workforce Stabilization Grant. The funds can be utilized for employee compensation in a variety of forms: stipends, pre-employment costs, expanded benefits, sign-on bonuses, and referral bonuses. At next week's meeting, our governing board will be asked to make 2 critical actions. They will be asked to formally accept the award. Then we will be presenting the administration's expenditure proposal, the first of 2. The funds must be spent prior to September 30th, 2023, and so we will be recommending next week an initial expenditure plan of $3.1 million, and then we will be returning in the spring with a second expenditure proposal for board consideration for the remaining portion of the grant. Why the gap? We are exploring every single possible avenue to be able to use some of these funds for capital. As all of you know, our deferred maintenance and our facilities are in a very, very significant need of larger investment of capital. So we're kicking the tires, looking under the hood to see what areas of this grant language would potentially allow us to use at least some of the funds for some of the preschool equipment, playground equipment that our teachers need inside the classroom and that our students need on the playground. So we're very, very excited about this grant. And tonight, the governing board will receive what will probably be one of the final study sessions on the ESSER funds that it has received in 3 different iterations: ESSER 1, ESSER 2, ESSER 3. For those of you tuning in, ESSER is the Elementary and Secondary Schools Economic Recovery Fund coming out of the American Rescue Plan that awards dollars to schools to help students with academic learning loss throughout COVID, as well as employee recruitment and retention, especially in critical areas. So tonight we're going to celebrate a $20 million investment in classroom technology and in-home internet access that has literally transformed Tucson Unified into a one-to-one district where every single student in the district that needs or wants a Chromebook, an iPad, or a laptop has access to one. And also, we've invested $68 million in our own employees as our governing board took action to award recruitment and retention stipends as well as vaccine stipends for our employees. We've invested through ESSER $5 million in 100 capital projects throughout the district. Some of them have been completed. Many of them focusing on outdoor learning spaces are slated for completion this year. And we're one of the few districts in the state of Arizona that actually provided discretionary budgets to each and every single school in our district so that our principals and our campus communities would have the autonomy and the freedom that they needed at the local level to make decisions about where they wanted to spend their ESSER dollars. Just over $19 million remain for the governing board to make decisions on this evening prior to the end of the grant in fiscal year 24, which would be June 30th, 2024. It's been a busy month, but a fun month for me across the district in August. I want to say thank you to the following school communities for hosting me for absolutely wonderful visits. I met some amazing employees in just the first 30 days of school. Thank you, Roscridge, Tucson High, Catalina High, and of course, Blendman and Booth-Fickett for some wonderful visits. Among the iconic programs I had the opportunity to visit and see some performances, Tucson High Choir. I got to visit the Catalina Culinary Arts, where the students prepared a delicious lunch for the CTE instructional department chairs of the district who were gathered there for their meeting. Had an opportunity to welcome them and, of course, visit our students in their soon-to-be renovated cooking space and food preparation area. Got to see a brief performance by Mariachi Pumas when I was there at Roscridge. Always amazing to see the work of that team. I want to say thank you to the team at Menlo Park, the Family Resource Center, for a wonderful family mixer night. Had an opportunity to attend the first family mixer of our family resource centers. There's one tonight, and I believe it's the last one, but each one of our family resource centers have hosted a family mixer night that have featured games and prizes and performances and resources for our community members. And I want to thank the Mexican American Student Services Department, specifically the Mexican American Student Services Department Parental Advisory Board. They hosted me for a breakfast out at Palo Verde last week, where our parents, and about 30 or 40 parents, had some very, very serious and focused questions on the state of safety and security here in the Tucson Unified School District. The parents represented all age groups and schools across the district. I had an opportunity to engage our parents and to talk to them about some of the steps that we've taken and are continuing to take to make sure that we prioritize school safety for all of us. And lastly, I want to thank the Pima County Superintendent's Office, Dustin Williams, and the Deputy Superintendent for Pima County, Deborah Bryson, for inviting me to the opening session of Lead Now, which is their premier leadership development program for new leaders, new site administrative leaders across Pima County. I was very proud to see that a majority of those seats are held by new Tucson Unified School District principals and assistant principals. So very excited for their invitation and for their continuing to support administrative professional development across Pima County. President Grijalva, members of the governing board, that concludes the superintendent's report for this evening.
Okay, thank you. Now we're on to call to the audience, and so I'll go ahead and turn that over to Ms. Luna Rose.
Thank you, Ms. Grijalva. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us for tonight's meeting. Members of the public may speak during the call to the audience portion of the agenda. The board president shall be responsible for recognizing speakers and for maintaining proper order by setting such limitations as they may be appropriate. Any person desiring to speak in person or have their comments read signed up by emailing or calling the board office or can complete a request to address the board form. When addressing the board, an individual shall state his/her full name and topic before going into the subject matter. Individuals are encouraged to be brief with a maximum time limit of 3 minutes. If you have any documents for the board, please give them to our board office staff and they will make sure each board member receives a copy. Individuals attending the meeting and or speaking before the board shall observe rules of propriety, decorum, and good conduct, and refrain from impertinent or slanderous remarks. Because TUSD serves students from preschool through high school, speakers should be aware that there may be children in the audience. At the conclusion of the call of the audience, the governing board president will ask if individual board members wish to respond to criticism made by those who have addressed the board, wish to ask staff to review a matter, or wish to ask that a matter be put forth on a future agenda. No more than 2 board members may address each criticism.
Just really quickly, ¿hay alguien que necesita los servicios de un intérprete? Okay, yo creo que no. Muchas gracias. Yeah, okay.
Thank you. First speaker this evening is Rhiannon Ward.
Hi, my name is Rhiannon Ward. My daughter's school was one of the schools that received a direct threat over the phone in March. The caller stated multiple times that they would come shoot up the school. The day after the threat, while the caller was still unknown and still able to carry out the threat, the district sent a single elderly gentleman to the school. He sat in his truck by the garbage cans for an hour or two. He wasn't there at pickup or the next day or the day after that, while the threat was still very real. The June board meeting with School Safety Director Mr. Hollums exposed a disconnect. The school safety's mission statement says they are responsible for proactive reduction of opportunities for crime. Proactive. The board asked for common sense, data-driven action, but he had a long-term plan that included layers of people training each other. And when pressed, he reluctantly gave a 3-year time period for safety inspections. Columbine was 23 years ago, Sandy Hook was 10 years ago. We've had plenty of time to secure the schools. We cannot wait another day. The proposal will not save lives in the event of a school shooter. I urge the board to direct Mr. Hollums to use common sense technology and hardware to secure our schools now, today, like high fences with barb arms and barbed wire, security cameras and sensors that alert if a door is propped open. The barb arms cost about $10. I would be happy to get a group of volunteers to come and install them on a Saturday. There's a vacant lot near the school that is protected with angled, pointed barb arms. A vacant lot is better protected than our school. An officer statistically will not be at the right place at the right time. He or she may be on the wrong side of town or even the wrong side of campus. These acts of violence take seconds. The only defense we have is to secure the campus and keep people from walking in unknown and with no resistance. As of May, there have been 27 school shootings across the country in 2022. That is more than one per week. Which school is next? What good is a locked front door if I can just hop a chain link fence? There was a threat at an FBI building a few months ago. A censor warned the armed, trained adult law enforcement that there was a threat. Why don't 5-year-olds get that same security? Why don't teachers get a warning that the building has been breached, giving them precious seconds to act? Gun violence is now the leading cause of death for school children. It is no longer auto accidents because data was used to make cars and roads safer. I get surveys on a regular basis from TUSD asking me for my input on school lunches, school events, even the best dates for spring and fall break. I would like TUSD to consider my input on the safety of my child. A survey could be emailed today for free to every parent and teacher. We are at the school every day. Teachers can tell you if there is a classroom door that doesn't lock on the inside. They can tell you that they teach while watching their back. Parents can tell you if a gate is regularly left open. A few months ago, a woman came to a board meeting. She made a threat to the security guard. The board voted that very same day to stop that from happening again. I urge you to take that same immediate and decisive action for our children. A grand jury recently found some of the Marjorie Stoneman board members committed a neglect of duty for not preventing deaths. The culture has changed. We are tired of the loss of life. Administrators are losing their jobs, being placed on leave, and being found civilly responsible. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is Jern Blanston. Jern? Okay. We will go on to Melissa Conroy.
Biden just called for an increase in the CDC budget from just under $9 billion in 2022 to a mind-blowing $38 billion in 2023. The CDC has already shown Americans that they will trample on fundamental rights in the name of the greater good. They ignored privacy rights by buying cell phone data to track Americans during the lockdowns and trampled free speech by colluding with social media to erase dissenting voices. What will they do with more resources? By now, even COVID-19 vaccine fanatics notice that the gene therapy jab are dangerous and often deadly. A growing list of irrefutable facts and data about the jabs offers proof that they do not prevent someone from catching or transmitting COVID. As the pandemic remains a tool of the Biden administration and the midterms approach, these facts need to be repeated and shared far and wide. Simply put, the jabs are killing people. A recent analysis of VAERS data through July 2022 reveals an astonishing 1.37 million reported adverse reactions to the shots, including roughly 30,000 deaths. Without a doubt, these numbers are significantly higher since, as the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services noted, only 1 to 10% of all adverse reactions are reported to VAERS. As the pandemic continues to defy predictions about when it will finally be over, there is a phenomenon taking place across the U.S. and around the globe. COVID-19 case rates increase alongside vaccination rates. As we approach 1 year since the FDA issued its approval of the jabs, young, healthy athletes are collapsing and dying at an unprecedented rate. Myocarditis is plaguing teens. Pilots are having heart attacks, and reports from the UK government reveal that fully vaccinated children are over 13,000% more likely to die of COVID than children who are not vaccinated. Yet the Biden administration is now relentlessly pushing the jabs on infants as young as 6 months old. Over 15,000 epidemiologists have signed the Great Barrington Declaration around the grave concerns related to the deadly COVID-19 vaccine and other pandemic restrictions. Nevertheless, the clinical trial on humanity with the experimental jabs continues with little recourse for anyone following injury. Conveniently, Big Pharma is immune from liability, and like always, the mainstream media, primarily funded by Big Pharma, remains silent. Like I said before, you need to stop listening to the CDC. The CDC is corrupt and needs to be shut down, and Nuremberg 2.0 is coming.
Thank you. Next is Virginia Bichet.
Sadie, it's nice to see your face today. There's no such thing as misinformation in medical sciences. There's simply scientific data and two or more interpretive points of view. We cannot strip the civil liberties of the right to free speech in medical discourse. Freedom of speech is necessary for progress. The TUSD School Board forced medical products for participation while the FDA was not open and transparent to the public on safety event data. Many Americans do not trust the FDA and are discovering they may be involved in a safety cover-up with suppliers on a public program. As the subclinical injuries and deaths increased, the FDA recoiled while businesses, schools, and family members took over and pushed the drug out onto others out of fear or to receive government grants. If the jab is so safe, why did the FDA ask for 55 years to complete a FOIA request on Pfizer's vaccine? There is a financial entanglement between regulatory agencies and pharmaceutical companies, and this sweetheart deal can be seen at TUSD. As the district accepted APR ESSER funds for grants, what were the guidelines for this free money? Mask, test, inject, isolate, and trace. Being forced to take a product, but being told I need to wait until the US tricentennial in 2076 for safety data is a bit suspicious. The FDA proposed in documents filed in a US district court in favor of this schedule, but you want me to trust the company who also contributed to the overuse of antibiotics and the opioid epidemic. The clinical trials were to last until 2023, but Fauci terminated the trial after 6 short months, as breakthrough cases were becoming impossible to hide. If the injection worked, then why did the CDC director announce breakthrough cases would no longer be tracked as of May 2021? The best way to hide the failures was to give the placebo group the injection and fail to provide the public with any long-term clinical studies, as no data looks better than the deadly data accumulating. In 2 months, the jabs lost significant efficacy, and in 6 months, perished, so boosters were marketed, but they were quickly seen as more failures. As the cycle continues, the EUA products flung onto the market in addition to the failing boosters. Why do we need Paxlovid if the boosters work? While the FDA gets 45% of its total budget from pharmaceutical companies, the CDC spends $4.9 billion of its $12 billion budget purchasing vaccines and distributing them. As the new Omicron booster rolls out, keep in mind the old ones failed, so why will this one be different? The FDA is relying on the manufacturer's rodent study, which shows an antibody rise in the mice against...
Ma'am, your time has expired. Thank you. Okay, next letter to be read from Stephanie Kirk.
Topic, wrong side of history. My name is Stephanie Kirk. Last time I was here, I was disciplined and ushered out for using so-called inappropriate language. However, it was the same language children read in books provided by the school using my tax money. In the past, I have been denied attendance for not masking, even though on the mask box it states that masks do not stop or prevent transmission, just like all the injections. Dr. Ravi has interrupted me while I was listening to the board meeting in the past by asking me about the Tucson High drag queen page that exploits children online. Not only did Ravi interrupt, but he also asked rudely and then ignored my returning question regarding the district's promotion of gender dysmorphia through drag shows. Most of the board stays preoccupied during the call to the public by not looking in the correct direction and only responding when they are triggered. Instead of hosting an open discussion, you push medical procedures on your staff and children that are not only experimental but are also killing people. As the data comes out and each of you here sees that you stood on the wrong side of history, I wish you healing because it will be a huge psychological burden. Some people in this world are easily purchased, and this district has received grant money for complying with unconstitutional mandates and requirements. TUSD even had to hire additional help to ensure that all the ESSER grant money was spent and not wasted. It's unfortunate that you wasted our children's education and lives. If ever there were bullies on the playground, they were you, and you have your own police officer to make sure your tyrant ways are followed or else. There will be no promotions for the CDC if danger is found in the jab, but salaries do increase with higher demands of the vaccine. CDC owns 57 vaccine patents, and each time the jabs are sold, CDC profits. Do you think the CDC should also be telling us what and when to take the jab? The regulatory agencies have become a subsidiary norm of the industry. There are zero proper checks and balances in their approval, and there is no long-term data for those who are injected. Pfizer unblinded their study at 6 months and gave the unjabbed the vaccine, which stopped the trial, so we do not know anything long-term. The companies are protected by the 1986 Act, and it is time our taxpayer-funded schools stop selling big pharma government drugs for grants. The data is coming out and much is already here. You just have not been open to seeing it. Stephanie Kirk.
Thank you. And our next speaker is Art Lopez.
All right, well, I'm glad everyone's following CDC guidelines now, no mask. Oh, my mask? My mask is off, but I'm glad everyone's wearing, nice to see your face. I say that jokingly, but great letter by the first young lady that came out here. That is actually the one thing that I want to talk about. She actually kind of got me going and thinking, and I had this whole thing in my head that I want to talk about. What we saw, and I'm sure you guys have been briefed on it, hopefully, about the studies, the numbers that came out for the Arizona American, how low the scores were. And this is something that when I first started coming here, I said I'll be a thorn in your guys' behind. Actually, I told Adelita, because she was the only one that responded to my response. Because what you've done to our kids over the last 2 years, and for you kids and parents listening on Zoom, you have to realize the freedom that was taken from you. Us parents, the three here tonight, and the majority that come here to speak, we're speaking for you, for the public, who are not, I don't want to say brave enough, may not have the time, but some people don't like to speak in public. And we are here to protect your freedom. The unprofessionalism that I see throughout the board, and I've sat on boards and I've been in corporate America, and I see and I talk about unprofessionalism all the time. What I see in front of me is unprofessionalism, and it's unfortunate because you guys are the ones driving the boat. You're steering the boat to where we're going. We're concerned more about masks. We're concerned more about drag queen. We don't apologize for somebody who opposes that. We don't want to protect our kids with more firearms because that's dangerous. Yet, as we said, 22 shootings across America. If that happens here, who's to blame? We can go back to the recorded board meeting where it said, "Oh, we don't need more protection here." You know, so you guys need to open your eyes and realize who you're serving. You know, I can sit here and be unprofessional and call everybody out, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just saying as a whole, you board members work for the students, work for us. My son is a senior this year. And you know what next year where I'll be at? I'll be here. The following year where I'm going to be at? I'm going to be there as a board member. My job is to protect the community, to speak out for the community. Even though my kid's going to be gone into college, you know, I will not stop protecting and voicing my opinion. And we the people will not stop.
All right, thank you. All right, President Grijalva, that concludes this evening's call to the audience.
Okay. Thank you. So, board members, anyone wish to ask staff to review a matter, ask that a matter be put on a future agenda, or respond to a criticism? Ms. Shaw.
Thank you, and thank you for everyone who spoke tonight. I was hoping that we can place on a future agenda a plan of action from the school safety department, including a timeline for our most at-risk schools for making sure that they are protected and protected from any security breach. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? All right, thank you. Oh, Dr. Trujillo.
Thank you, President Grijalva. I just wanted to address correct protocol. One of the calls to the audience alleged that Board Member Shaw refused to answer specific questions that they raised during call to the audience. Our governing board members are not allowed to respond to individual speakers while they're speaking during call to the audience. Just want to make sure that we clarified that protocol for those watching the public. Thank you.
Thank you for clarifying that. We can't. Okay, now we're on consent agenda. Dr. Trujillo.
President Grijalva, members of the governing board, I would like to recommend for your consideration of approval the consent agenda as organized and presented, items 5.2 to 5.10.
Okay, board members. Ms. Shaw.
Can we pull item 5.6?
Okay, anyone else? All right, I'll go ahead and move item 5.2 through 5.10 and omitting 5.6. That's going to get pulled.
So moved.
Okay, I moved it. Do you want a second?
Oh, I thought you
Yeah, you second. I moved it. Do you want a second? Okay. All right.
Second.
So I have a motion and a second by Ms. Luna Rose. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Item passes. And Ms. Counts is joining us via Zoom. So that was the voice you heard. 5.6, Ms. Shaw, is parking lot lease agreement with Screwbeam Brewery at the Morrow Education Center with authorization for operations program manager to execute the amendment. You requested that item be pulled?
Yes. I would like more information, and also wondering why we are interested in leasing our parking lot spaces after hours to a brewery, which, you know, breweries sell beer, and so theoretically the people parking in our parking lot will be intoxicated. And the dollar amount is only $4,080 for the year. And it just seems kind of bizarre to me that we are going to follow through with this. I think we could, I mean, if it's a money thing, I feel like we could make more money leasing our parking lot to the U of A during their football games or any athletic games. And so I'm uncomfortable with voting yes on this. Is there any more information that we should know?
Yes, Board Member Shaw, thank you for the opportunity to provide some additional clarification. So we are, I'm going to invite Mr. Nodine to come to the podium. Number one, we felt comfortable bringing this forward because this is not an educational space. This is not parking lot access to any of our schools or young people. The hours stipulated in the proposed agreement up for consideration restrict usage of these spaces to 4 p.m. to 6 a.m. in the morning. So pretty much clearing the workday. It's also for designated spaces closest to the brewery. But for more information, I will certainly turn it over to Mr. Nodine for some more specifics.
Hi, Mr. Nodine.
President Grijalva, members of the board. Dr. Trujillo summarized it pretty well. We're looking for a market rate for the parking spaces. It's really up to the board whether you want to move forward with that or not. I understand it's not a lot. It was a request from the neighboring property that's they're new owners, but they've been there for quite a while, and they park on the street and probably park in our lot sometimes at night anyway. So we saw it as an opportunity to legitimize the parking and also control it a little bit better.
Okay. Any other questions?
I had a question.
Yeah, Ms. Luna Rose.
Hi, Mr. Nodine. Thank
Hi.
you. So after the 6 a.m., who does cleanup?
They're required to do any cleanup that is needed. And so we would have to check that, and if there's a problem, call them up and ask them to take care of it.
Okay. And then is there, I'm sorry, one more question, Ms. Grohl.
Sure.
Neighborhood association, has there been agreement with them?
We didn't discuss that with the neighborhood association.
Okay. Because that's what I believe that's
Iron Horse.
Iron Horse, and
Yeah,
they're
it
pretty
is.
active
They are.
neighborhoods association. So I'm wondering if pulling it and putting it aside and maybe bringing a neighborhood representative to see if they're okay with us leasing, because I mean that's going to affect them too. And those new apartments are right there, dorms are down, So I'm kind of curious.
And I think what I'm hearing or sort of reading between the lines is that they're likely parking there already. So
Correct.
we're probably, what we're trying to do is make sure that we can hold someone accountable. Otherwise, they'll continue to park there regardless. Dr. Trujillo and then Dr. Shaw.
Yeah, I would like to address the Iron Horse. Their primary feedback was probably at the initial granting of a liquor license when the business was moving into the neighborhood. I think that Iron Horse would probably be facing an equally disruptive situation with parking on the street and the curb in front of people's homes, in front of people's apartments. We certainly can check in with them. I don't want to speak for them, but my estimation is we would probably actually be assisting them by providing at least some spaces that would be it wouldn't be curbside. We wouldn't run the risk of blocking people's driveways or their homes or their apartments.
Okay, Dr. Ravi.
Right, I mean, there's a brewery exists, and so the people need to park somewhere, and so they're either on the street or they can at least make some money off of getting them into our parking lot, and so I'm not sure what the controversy is, and I'll move the item.
Okay, I'll second. Ms. Shaw.
Thank you. I seem to remember us voting against accepting any money from any tobacco advertising. I'm not sure if it also pertained to liquor advertising, but I just don't know why we're collaborating with this brewery. Like, we don't collaborate with other breweries who are nearby, and I just think it's contrary to our mission as a school district. We don't need to be helping a brewery out with their customers. I think if they didn't have a parking lot, they should have taken that into account when they decided to get their license for that location.
Okay, any other discussion? Comments?
Also,
Yeah,
one
go
more.
ahead, Ms. Shaw.
Have we reached out to the University of Arizona to see if they would be interested in leasing our parking lot? I'm sure we could generate more funds for our district through that institution rather than this brewery.
Dr. Trujillo.
We're not really permitted to aggressively seek out customers, just like procurement prevents us from approaching vendors and soliciting services. So we would have to be very, very careful, certainly with that kind of communication.
Okay.
One more question.
Go
if I
ahead.
may. Thank you. Mr. Nodine, how did you arrive at that dollar amount?
I did, when we were renting Carrillo, we rent the parking by Carrillo, I researched all of the downtown properties, and I was able to find good information on daytime parking, so that the four parking spaces that are exclusive use. but I wasn't able to find much on non-exclusive evening parking, so I had to come up with what seemed like a reasonable number.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So we have a motion and a second. Can I ask for a roll call vote, please?
Dr. Ravi?
Yes.
Ms. Shaw?
No.
Ms. Counts?
Yes.
Ms. Luna Rose? No. Ms. Grijalva?
No. Item fails 3-2 with Dr. Ravi and Ms. Counts voting in favor and the rest voting no.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Item 6.1, administrative appointments, reassignments, and transfers. Interim Executive Director, Human Resources, Dr. Trujillo.
Yes, President Grijalva, members of the governing board, tonight represents an opportunity, number one, to formally thank our outgoing Executive Director for Human Resources, Renee Heuser, who is moving on from TUSD to other professional endeavors. I want to thank her for all the wonderful years of support and commitment to the employees of the Tucson Unified School District, and to wish her all the best in her future endeavors. And with that, we'd like to recommend an interim recommendation for the position of Executive Director for Human Resources. Tonight's recommendation currently serves as the director. His day job at present is second in command over the day-to-day operations of Human Resources, and we're going to be requesting that he take the next step to Executive Director while currently serving as Director of Human Resources. He served as a Senior Program Coordinator inside of Human Resources and has been with the district for the last few years. So tonight we'd like to recommend Mr. Christopher McNeely to serve as the Interim Executive Director for Human Resources for Tucson Unified.
Thank you, Dr. Trujillo. I'll move the item.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second by Ms. Luna Rose. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Item passes unanimously. Congratulations. Mr. McNeely, is he around? Is he online or no?
I don't, Mr. McNeely is traveling for his brother's wedding, so he will not be
Excellent.
able to join us this evening, but certainly does send his regards.
Congratulations and thank you. Okay, now we're on item 7.1, ESSER 1, 2, 3 grant update. Dr. Trujillo.
Yes, I'd like to welcome our Grants and Federal Programs Director, Mr. John Lanza. He will be providing the governing board with this update and financial summary. The last three iterations of the ESSER grant that the district has received, the life of ESSER funding in the district does come to an end at the end of fiscal year 2024, which would be June 2024. So with that, I'd like to welcome Mr. Lanza. It looks like Mr. Lanza is on the way. There he is.
Okay, I'm going to run to the bathroom, okay?
Apologies for being a little late coming in here. Good evening, everybody. Oh, good? Okay. Governing Board President, members of the board, and Superintendent Trujillo. Tonight I'm going to be going over a summary of our financial current standing for ESSER 1, 2, and 3. So as you know, these three grants have been in place for the last couple years. We'll start off just with the review again of our requirements for spending this money. So on the screen there you can see we have 7 different areas that we use to guide our decision making and how we spent the money for ESSER 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so decision making and basically just kind of the what again guided us in making decisions. The allowable use, these are grants, these are federal grants, they do have guidelines. We had immediate needs and responses that we needed to respond when going through COVID. So what you see there are 4 strategic priorities that we outlined for the spending of the funds: mitigation measures, academic recovery, long-term investments, and then one-time purchases. Summary of the 3 grants that we have. The first, ESSER 1, is $18.5 million. That grant is essentially over. At the end of this month, September 2022, the grant concludes. All that funding has been allocated, final purchases have been made, what we have purchased has been received, so that is basically a grant that has been finalized. ESSER 2, $76.3 million. This grant was the majority of last school year, so fiscal year 22. The funds have been allocated, and our final decisions on where that funding will go need to be made by the end of this month. You'll see later on in the presentation that essentially there's not any funding that has not been allocated or spent in that grant at this point. And then ESSER 3, this is really our active grant. This is going into this school year. Governing board has been approving items over the last year for ESSER 3. The funding has been allocated to the schools. And then the START item there, 20% required for academic loss. That is going to be a key item tonight that I'm going to outline where we stand in that requirement, but also how that is going to really kind of guide some of the decisions that you'll need to make once we see the numbers where they actually ended up. And then final decisions for ESSER 3 are actually next September. So September 30th, 2023 is when we have to make final decisions. So we really do have a full year to make decisions on the final funds for ESSER 3. Key dates, I shared this with you in April, and this is, we're kind of the key markers I needed you to be aware of. So the first on the left with ESSER 3 is this month. And really, I'm sorry, the one on the left, ESSER 2, is this month. And essentially, there's not really any funding decisions to be made with ESSER 2. So the right-hand side there, ESSER 3 is really where the decisions will need to be made by September 30th, 2023. You will see later on that that date of 2023, keep in mind that the funding is available through 2024. Okay, so decisions by 2023, final spending through 2024. I'm going to now take you through a bit of a progression of what our funding went through in summary last year, where we stood financially as we headed into the summer, and then a projection of where our numbers are showing for this next year. This is a summary of where some of that money went during this past school year. And Dr. Trujillo also mentioned some of these numbers that you see up there. But again, ESSER 2 funding, $350,000 per school, and they were able to make decisions at the site level, principal, site council, the staff, to decide what the immediate needs were at the school. We funded last year 272.57 FTE. That was throughout our schools, and at the district level, that was $7.2 million. Funded over 100 capital projects, and those are currently, many of them are in development, but that was just over $5 million. Curriculum and classroom instructional aids, that was $2 million that was going into the schools. Capital items, so these are many of those items that we heard about last year: flexible seating, additional desk and chairs and tables in the schools. If you remember at one point, cafeteria tables, when we came back to school and the need to really spread out students in the cafeteria, those were all the sort of items that were ordered through capital items, around $3 million. And then schools spent about $5.5 million on technology. And that was a whole range of areas. Obviously, there are your standard laptops and Promethean boards, but a lot of charging stations, a lot of kind of individual storage that was needed when all the kids came back last year with their laptops. On the right-hand side, ESSER 3 funds. This is what you as a governing board were approving last year. $157.4 million was approved last school year. Some of the large items, the one-to-one laptop initiative, that was $14 million. HVAC projects, $1.4 million. Vaccine stipends, $5.8. If you remember, the insurance increase, to cover the insurance increase for all of our staff, was $1 million. And then the retention stipends in February, that was $63 million that was allocated. So that was kind of a summary of last school year. And then on this next slide, you'll see we started looking at, well, I guess a snapshot of the staffing. So this is just a more detailed look at the staffing that I mentioned earlier, 272 FTE. And this is grouped by our positions across the district. Some of these are pretty general positions, so you see some of the teacher positions on the right-hand side. I will point out on the bottom right, some of our more, I guess, fillable positions where we're able to find staff, bring them in, and get them into schools. Teacher RTI, I think that's about the fourth up from the end. That was 30.65 positions were in the schools. And then second from the bottom, teacher assistant, over 77 teacher assistant FTE were brought into the school. So those were the more successful positions we were able to fill at the school.
RTI?
Sorry, response to intervention. Yes. So they actually, in the wording there, the intervention position. So it's not specific to math or reading. It's a little more general intervention support for students in the school. So overall, that was $7.2 million that was able to fund positions across our district. Now a bit of a shift to looking at where we stood heading into the summer. And this slide you saw first in April, you saw it again at the end of the summer. Basically, as you work your way down that slide, once we factored in recurring costs that are there on the middle left, that was $52 million. We were left with $80 million that was unallocated. At that point, we were looking at stipends, and the stipend cost was $63 million. And as we got through the summer, we were able to identify that we were going to be right around $17 million as we were going to the summer. Not quite finishing out the fiscal year, but seeing where the numbers were leading us. And this is our summary of where we ended up at the end of fiscal year 23. I'm sorry, fiscal year 22. So this was at the end of June 30th. And our numbers that you see there, the total award on the top line, $267 million, that's the combination of ESSER 1, 2, and 3 together. You can see what was spent, $99.9 million through the end of fiscal 22. That left us $167 million. And then approved and allocated, but not yet committed. These are different areas that you have already approved. Stipends would be the biggest one. So that $63 million is part of that $148 million that's there that's approved and allocated but uncommitted. Also school allocations. So for this school year, allocations for staffing that's at the schools, that is also part of that. So these are things that we know are out there that are going to be spent. They just have not come off our books yet at this point. So looking at the bottom line, we have $19.1 million that has basically our remaining balance at the end of the fiscal year. We have not allocated that amount. Now this next slide will factor in our requirement of 20% being spent on academic loss. So on the left-hand side there, that list of items, this is what the Arizona Department of Education has approved in our grant as meeting the academic loss requirement. And really, as we go through that, these are some of the things that we've already started. Summer school for 2021, we spent $1.9 million on that. Summer school in 2022, just over $1 million. And then summer school for 2023, this is what you allocated for the next summer, $5.6 million. Approved positions, so for this past school year, on the right-hand side are approved positions that the Arizona Department of Education has labeled as meeting the need for academic loss. That amounted to just over $3 million. So if we'll just take a little break there where the arrow is and look at the list of positions on the right, math interventionists, reading interventionists, RTI teachers, again, response to intervention, social worker, counselor, certified academic tutors who do tutoring after school, and then avid tutors and kindergarten teachers. These positions, the Arizona Department of Education determined meet the need for academic loss. Their primary criteria was that they were direct instruction or really kind of face-to-face with students. So if you think about the work of an interventionist, they're sitting down with the student, doing direct intervention with the student. Counselors, they factored in social-emotional learning as meeting this academic loss need. So counselors being face-to-face, social workers being face-to-face. Some positions that we've talked about quite a bit that you may not see on that list are the CSP positions, curriculum service providers, and MTSS positions, multi-tier systems of support. Those two positions they did not consider as academic loss because they were either working more directly with teachers, not students, in the case of the CSP, and then the MTSS is really managing and working with the teachers on the different supports in the school and triaging what the needs are, tier 2, tier 3, tier 1 needs for students. So that was the difference. That's really why some of these positions did not land on this list and the ones that you see there did. So for fiscal 22, the last school year, we had just over $3 million in FTE costs that qualified. For this upcoming school year, principals and schools have put in place $4.7 million of these positions that are actively taking place. These are filled positions that are out there in our schools right now. And then for this coming school year, fiscal 23, 30% of our kindergarten cost is allowed to be picked up, or we are approved to pick it up in ESSER 3. The kindergarten costs, I'm sure you're aware, 50% of a kindergarten's teacher's cost is covered by the state through maintenance and operation funds, just like the rest of our teachers. The rest of that 50%, the district has to figure out how to fund that. So in this case, we are planning to use 30% of that cost that's remaining and pay for it with ESSER funds. So the total on that has been approved and already targeted for academic loss is just over $20 million. So $20,084,037 has been approved for academic loss. The bottom line there is that we are short $14,501,005.88 in meeting our goal for academic loss. So that is an amount that is very important in considering how we are going to use the remaining $19 million. $14.5 million of that really needs to be set aside, and we are required to set it aside to meet the academic loss requirement. So if you, there we go. So
while we're on this page, why is the jump so large from summer of 2022 to summer of 2023?
Good question. So you see each of those summers is a little different. Other funding sources were used in those years. So this past year in 2022, a large amount of Title I funding was used at our schools for summer school. We had really a surplus of Title I funding after coming out of COVID, where we weren't able to do a lot of the programming. And we had to spend a certain amount of that Title I or give it back to the state. So we, in that time, used it for summer school, and we're able to push off some of the ESSER funding and not use it.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so staying with the 20% academic loss that we're required, again, $14.5 million we are required to use in that area. Here is a breakdown of where we are suggesting that we use the remainder of that $14.5 million. You can see these items listed. We're asking for one more year of funding the approved items, the approved positions that ADE has counted for academic loss. I basically took that same number that was listed previously, that $4.7 million, and just using that as a ballpark, I'm asking that we use that same dollar amount, the same positions, we keep them in place for fiscal year 24. So positions that are in place right now that meet that academic loss requirement, we also fund those for fiscal year 24. The second item there is again the same item from previously, 30% spent on kindergarten and funding that, using that also in fiscal year 24. And then the third item is funding one more year of summer school. I just used the same dollar amount that you had projected previously, $5.6 million, and using that also for summer 2024. That still leaves us slightly short of where we needed to be. So the two items there at the bottom that are starred, high school credit recovery program and school turnaround program. On the next slide, I have those detailed a bit more. Those are new items. These are not items that we've talked about previously. And these are items that I would recommend that we use that would count for academic loss and get us to our total. And here's a little more detail on those two items. So the turnaround specialists, we have schools that have recently been identified for federal school improvement. And what we are proposing is being able to use some of our ESSER funding to pay a turnaround specialist to come in and work with these schools. These schools are really at a critical spot. We have 1 year with the Arizona Department of Education to have a turnaround and an increase in those schools before they go into a 3-year cycle of school improvement. So this proposal here is bringing in a specialist to be able to provide basically on-site support for those schools and really put a focus on this year and those schools being able to turn around their scores and their improvement. That is a $56,000 cost that we were looking at. This second item up there is for RTI teachers to work at our high schools, and these 12 FTE would focus on credit recovery. One of the things that we have seen as we came out of COVID is that our high schoolers, just a building of credit deficiency. Our numbers at the senior 12th grade and 11th grade level are just compounded really from coming out of COVID. So This is a proposal here to bring additional FTE, 12 FTE into those 9 schools to provide credit recovery options beyond the regular school day. So extended until 6 p.m. at those schools, and being able to have the staff available on site for students that need unique situations to be able to recover credits. And many of them do need the extra time, even in the day, to get in their credits to be able to graduate on time with their cohorts. That is at a cost of $840,000. Again, we use the same calculations as any of our other FTE with ESSER. $70,000 times 12 gets us to that $840,000. The total cost on those 2 items is $896,000. And then when we factor that in with where we would, well, I'm going to go back one actually to summarize. When we factor in, again, those 2 new items, we are at $14.8 million. So that gets us over that 20% threshold of 14.5. Any questions there? I'll maybe pause here before I go into the larger summary. Okay. Okay, so the final projection, if we factor in all those items of where we ended up and what we need to set aside for the 20% requirement, we have 19.1. We are asking that we set aside 14.8 to meet the 20% requirement, and that would leave us with 4.2 million unallocated. It's obviously going from that 19 where we were, factoring the 20% brings that down quite a bit. Some considerations, you remember at the beginning of ESSER when we were kind of rolling out our plans for the schools and their allocations, we had emphasized having 5 positions in place at all of our schools, having intervention teachers, having counselors, social workers, CSPs, and MTSS, making sure all our kids in TUSD had access to those positions as we went and came out of COVID. 2 positions from those, the MTSS and CSP, are not considered academic loss. So right now, under this proposal, they would not be in place past this school year if they were funded with ESSER. And I kind of put some numbers there just so you have a picture of what that cost is. It's about $3.4 million for those 2 positions to carry through the end of 2024. And then also keep in mind our allocated but unspent funds. When we shared this with you in spring, we were saying around 14 million, and that actually ended up being a little larger at 19 million. We can't just project and say it's going to be out there, but what we've seen the trend, all those allocated dollar amounts, they don't all get spent. You know, there are things that factor in with benefits and staffing, maybe people not working the full year. There are savings that build up in there. So just we did see that projected unallocated amount actually grow when we went from spring to now. So that is something we could see happen here as well. Final big piece of information that you had asked for and just to consider as you look at all these options. ESSER 3, we are able to take indirect rate. That indirect rate is 3.11% with that grant. That is just over $5 million. If you wanted to take the max amount for that grant, just over $5 million. Taking less than the max is an option in the grants, but based on what we need to set aside for academic loss, that max amount should be capped at 4.2. Again, the rest of it we do need to keep set aside for academic loss. And back to this slide that really has the kind of the summary and the core of our information, using the recommendations here and setting aside 4.8 million for academic loss, we would be left with 4.2 unallocated at this point. The recommendation is that we reserve that amount that was totaled up, just over 15 million for academic loss, approve the allocation for those 2 requests that I outlined, and then that remaining 4.2, we're not under any pressure right now to allocate that to anything. It's with ESSER 3. We don't have to make a decision on that until September 2023, so we have a full year. And that is really, you know, this recommendation is that we have that amount. We don't need to do anything with it right now. If you wanted to have more dialogue about options, or I could pursue, you know, different options that might be available, we have time to do that.
Board members,
that is it.
Okay. Any questions? Dr. Ravi.
Thank you, President Grubb. I have a whole slew of questions. First of all, just trying to understand this slide with the recommendation, the reserve, the $15.1 million. Did you mean 14.8 or 14.9? Where did that 15.088 come from? Or is it the same number that we're reserving with the 14.888 on the other slides?
You are correct. That is the 14.88.
Okay, so we're reserving that amount for academic loss.
Correct.
Now, are we cutting it too close? Because we're right at the 20% threshold with 14.8. 14.5 looks like is a 20%. And
We are close.
Because like with vacancies and other things, like we're at risk for not hitting that threshold.
We are close. We are just over, I mean, roughly 300,000, in the scope of 30 million. It is close.
Yeah, like do we need to allocate more so that we can in case there are vacancy issues,
we
hit to 20%?
We could, yes. And again, we don't know where all those numbers are going to fall, but it is something we should consider putting more money towards that so that we ensure that we hit it. We are just slightly over it.
Ms. Grijalva?
Yes. Ms. Luna Rose.
Thank you. And I'm probably going to feel sorry about asking for this, but can you explain indirect rate for those who are, the slide about indirect rate? What is the correlation of the 3.11%? What does that mean for the general public so they know what we plan to do?
Sure. So in a grant, because of basically the management of the grant, you're able to take a portion of that grant and use it for the management of the grant at the district level. So the rate changes periodically. So from year to year, that rate may look a little different. This grant, our rate that we were allowed to pull out was up to 3.1. We don't always take the indirect. For some smaller grants, it doesn't make sense. For larger ones, we have. It just depends really on the situation. In ESSER 1 and ESSER 2, we did not take any of the indirect rate for those. We actually had staffing that we put in place and paid through ESSER to help manage it. But we do take it for many of our other grants. It helps fund positions that support the whole process from grants through HR, through finance, through payroll. And this was one of them that we had to get additional positions in place just to manage the ESSER funds that were coming through. So it is an option. It's always an option with grants. But for this one, again, it's just out of ESSER 3, and that amount would be just over $5 million we could pull.
Yeah, and usually it's a really small indirect considering like the administrative load, and some grants don't allow you to have any. So it just depends. This is pretty low percentage-wise for a district in the admin our size. Dr. Ravi? Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Shaw and then Dr. Ravi.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Alonso, for the presentation. I wonder if librarians and library materials would fall under the umbrella of academic loss?
I can check.
Okay.
Yes, I can check.
Thank you.
Good question. Dr. Ravi?
Sure. I have a follow-up on the indirect topic here. So from my understanding, please correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding with the indirect is that if we took the full amount, the $5 million would then move from the ESSER to our M&O, and then it goes to our M&O carry forward, which we can then use however we want to, whenever we want to, forever. That would be a really good benefit for us, right? So we take the max indirect, then we have full freedom to spend it as we wish, as opposed to any requirements from ESSER.
You're correct. You are free from the ESSER requirements. So it does go, I guess in a sense, into another account, indirect, that is spread throughout the district. In specific roles, I guess I shouldn't just say spread, it's as specific positions and things that we fund with that.
Any other questions? Dr. Trujillo?
President Grijalva, members of the board, we fully support the recommendations brought forward here by Mr. Lanza, but I also wanted a quick word on the specialized positions. We see that we've got some extremely crucial positions that are funded out of ESSER, mainly the 77 or so teacher's assistants and our paraprofessionals working in general education settings. That's a vital funding source to be able to provide that. What's going to happen over the remainder of the 22-23 school year, which is fiscal year 23, and certainly the final year 23-24, pending your approval this evening, that's going to give our principals valuable time to be able to look at other funding sources to be able to keep these employees. Looking at their Title I budgets, some of our schools have desegregation budgets attached to them, like our magnet schools. looking at Title II, Title III, especially in the case of CSPs, Title II. So tonight's action on that would give our principals that extra additional time to be able to see where they might be able to pick up these positions in another funding source. It also allows us as an organization time to see what employee attrition looks like a year from now. If some of these particular positions could quite simply slide into a vacancy because of employee attrition. So I just wanted to provide those additional points of rationale as you consider action on this item this evening.
Dr. Ravi.
Can we go to slide 11, please? So in terms of like what we need to do tonight to kind of get the ball rolling, like so most of these positions, most of this money is going into the next academic year, so the 23-24 year. So is there a rush on this decision now, or in terms of approving positions and getting people into roles and everything for the next academic year, or can we hold? And specifically with these new positions, the high school credit recovery program and the school turnaround program, is that something we approved tonight, you start posting we're hiring for now, or is that also for a future time period? I know the Budget Advisory Committee is looking at these positions, looking at ESSER funding, and has more time to really dig into some of these things. Going to be talking about literacy and librarians and MTS's coordinators and all these other things to address literacy during the Budget Advisory Committee meetings. So I'm trying to figure out what do we need to approve tonight to kind of let the administration move forward with work they want to do now, and what can we hold for another day to get more input from another committee we have that's going to be addressing this as well.
Mr. Lancer, Dr. Trujillo.
So I will have John speak to kind of the larger picture in terms of ESSER timelines for action. But understanding very clearly the question, like if there's one ask, which I'm understanding, Dr. Shaw, of something that you would just need the board to take action on tonight, to me would be the high school credit recovery. We've got some very compelling data from our enrollment ambassadors that high school kids are leaving our schools and going to smaller charter schools because of lack of credit recovery options. That's something that we think we can take action on fairly quickly. And also we have the infrastructure to do it and to get it going. And then, of course, the academic loss portion of it, of our kids being a little bit more deficient. But other than that to me is really just the more crucial ask. And I'll turn it over to John for timelines.
I would agree, Dr. Trujillo. So again, high school credit recovery, we would be able to do exactly what you said. Start immediately with the organization and hiring of that. And at the high school level, it is very critical that it starts this semester, because when you start the spring semester, it needs to be ready to go in January. High school principals know which kids are credit deficient, what their capacity is to start it. It doesn't have to wait for another school year. It can start at the semester at the high school level. These other items, the first three that are for fiscal 24, those could wait to make a decision on. That is funding that is a full year away. I would say, though, that because people are in some of those positions, it would need to be, I would say, maybe by the end of this semester, because when we start budgeting in January, we'll need to decide if we take these into other funding sources or if they stay here. So we do have time, but I would say really this semester is the time that we're working with, so that folks in those positions know where they stand and we know what funding sources we're going to use.
Okay, so if we were to not take action on all of these items, when could we conceivably recommend that administration bring back the other line items? The first meeting in October? When is the...
I would say probably January. That's when the Budget Advisory Committee would probably have recommendations for the governing board.
That might that be pushing it a little bit?
Well, we start our budget discussions in January, so that might be pushing it a little bit. I mean, it would fit, but it'd be tight.
We could probably do it sooner. I mean, we're addressing the literacy and the ESSER funding as the first topics in the Budget Advisory Committee in our agendas for this year. And so we address those and make recommendations. We can ask the Budget Advisory Committee for those recommendations earlier, so we can address it in November or December.
Okay. The school turnaround program is $56,000. Can we go ahead and move those two line items? So that would be $896,000. Is there a reason why we couldn't do this slide?
Mm-hmm.
I think the turnaround specialist makes sense. I think it's a relatively smaller amount of money. Yeah. Okay, so I'll go ahead and move this slide that is that is on the screen, which shows $56,000 for turnaround specialists and $840,000 for RTI teachers for high school credit recovery.
I'll second that.
Okay, so I have a motion, a second. Any other discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Item passes unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Alonso.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else on this item, Dr. Trujillo?
That completes this item. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Ms. Grijalva?
Yes.
Just might say for any staff that is listening, kind of to Mr. Lance's point, we are committed to those positions. We want them to continue, and we're just going to make sure we do our due diligence to make sure we're using the ESSER funding appropriately, that we're looking at other sources of funding. But we really do believe in these positions, at least myself, and I think I can speak to all of us, that we really want these positions to continue. So we're not holding this off to hold any positions or threaten any positions, but we really want to make sure we do our due diligence with where the sources of funding.
And I understand that point. I guess my issue is people start to look for other job opportunities if they're grant funded and are not guaranteed. And so I'd love to see this item come back before the end, before our staff goes off in December, because I just want people to not be concerned over the holidays that they're not going to have a position. Okay, so I hope, Dr. Trujillo, if you can provide us with some little additional information. I am concerned of our staff leaving for the holiday break and not having some security that they're going to have a job for those grant-funded positions.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. All right. 7.2 is school year 22-23 food services, opening of schools, update, and meal pricing. Dr. Trujillo.
Yeah, President Grijalva, board members, I'd like to welcome our Director for Food Services, Mrs. Lindsay Aguilar. It's a great opportunity for us to provide a opening of school update along with tonight's discussion on meal pricing. We'll also get some great information on what the first 30 days of school have looked like in terms of meal participation rates, both in school-wide free lunch areas as well as areas where students don't qualify. So I'll turn it over to Mrs. Aguilar at this particular time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, Board President, Governing Board members, Councilor Ross, Dr. Trujillo staff. Tonight, I'm just going to give a brief update on where we're at the first month in with our meal participation, as Dr. Trujillo mentioned. So August is typically a low month for us. We're kind of slow to start in the school meal program. That's traditionally the historical trend. And I can say from different boards and groups that I participate in, that's a national challenge right now with participation levels, especially coming out of the pandemic, having meals for free for all students the last 2 years. Most districts across the country are experiencing low participation levels, so we are definitely looking forward to the coming months where we typically see a plateau in October, and then second semester we typically peak February and March with higher levels. So currently we're just under 6,000 breakfast meals a day. I've given you comparisons to last August. You can see we're pretty similar to where we were last school year. Lunch just under 19,000 meals a day, also pretty similar to last school year. There's a daily participation breakdown by grade levels. So you can kind of see where our participation levels land. Obviously, we historically have much higher participation levels at the elementary and K-8. It's a more captive audience, if you will, as far as how they come into the cafeteria. And then, of course, middle and high schools, we do have lower participation levels, and we do have plans for this school year to really focus on the secondary levels to try to entice more students to participate in the meal program. So our current meal charge policy, which has been, it was board approved back in January of 2020, just before the school shut down for the pandemic. So this is a requirement of the National School Lunch Program. So USDA requires all districts to have a charge policy in terms of what your district is going to do when funds are not available for a student that doesn't qualify for free meals. This, I can say as a school meal operator, this is something that is very awkward for all involved. We're here to feed children, but we do also have a financial fiscal responsibility, although of course the spirit of what we do is to feed children. So I just want to caveat with that. Our current policy for grades K through 8 is a 2-meal charge is allowed on the student meal account of all menu options. And then after that, if funds are still not available, an alternate meal is provided. The alternate meal for K through 8 at breakfast is cereal, which is a daily entree choice for all students. And then at lunch, a grilled cheese sandwich, which is also a daily entree choice. USDA does require that whatever's provided as an alternate meal is something that's available to all students, because we certainly don't want to overly identify students that are receiving an alternate meal. So we try to make it as seamless as possible. The full meal price is charged for an alternate meal. The phrase alternate meal comes from the USDA meal charge policy language. So an alternate meal is what a district defines. It could be a full reimbursable meal, meaning it meets all of the nutritional requirements of a full meal that's being reimbursed at that paid reimbursement rate, or it could be just a sandwich, or like we do at the high school, it's an alternate option where they get a cheese stick and fruit. So
while we're on this page, because I think we all received an email, but a parent from a PTO at Carrillo brought this to my attention, and I didn't realize that we were providing an alternate meal but charging a full meal price. And so if the board voted for that, is that something that we have to vote to change, or is that something that could be done administratively? Because I remember we voted on what the alternate meals would be, but I guess maybe I was just focused on the high school, and I remembered that 50-cent charge versus, it didn't compute to me that we were going to be providing an alternate meal but charging the full price. So I just didn't know if that was something that we could do administratively, or is that something that the board would have to vote on? I think that's a legal question.
Ms. Grijalva, members of the board, my recommendation would be, since the board sets the price to begin with, that the board makes any changes to the price.
Okay. No, it wouldn't be a change to the price. The price was set. It's what the children get as a meal. So I think that when we voted on this, and that's why I didn't know. I sent that email thinking that something at that site, that something was wrong. But really what they were doing, what was our policy, which is we have a different price for the high school option, but the alternative meal for either, I guess, breakfast or lunch at the K-8 level is they're charged the standard meal price, but they get an alternative meal.
So the question is changing the alternative meal to a full meal.
Right.
Regular meal.
Correct. We're not changing the price because the price is set. We didn't change that price. We voted on that. I just didn't know if that was something that we'd have to vote on. Go ahead, Dr. Ravi.
Sure. So my understanding is that the alternate meal is just a term, and it actually is a full meal, and that's why it's being charged a full meal price.
It's a grilled cheese.
But it's a full meal, though. It's an option.
Well, but it's not what everyone else gets.
It is.
It is. It's a daily entree choice. So all students can have cereal at breakfast in addition to our daily featured breakfast item. And then at lunch, we have, at the elementary K-8 level, we have 2 entree choices of the day, and then grilled cheese and a nut-free peanut butter sandwich is available every day. So I understand what you're saying, the grilled cheese, but it is a daily entree choice to all students, and then they do receive the same side options available to all students.
But if a child doesn't have the money in their account, are they able to pick any of the meals, or are they only giving the alternative meal?
For 2 meal charges, yes. So the current policy is they can charge 2 meals, which is any option of whether it's pizza day or chicken nugget day. They can charge 2 meals on their account for all menu choices. And then if funds are still not available after those 2 meal charges, then it is restricted to the grilled cheese alternate meal choice.
I guess that's my issue. And I know that you understand it, because I'm sure, we were in this sort of financial hole for a little minute where we just continue to allow children to charge, but we're still charging them. We're not stopping them from getting food. They're just limited in the option. So I would rather, if a child wants to pick a grilled cheese and they don't have any money in their account, I understand that. But if they just want the tray that their friend has and it's a parent issue, we didn't sign in the application, or we didn't, send money with that child, I want them to be able to pick whatever they want and not be sort of kind of identified by like, oh, you didn't have enough money on your account. And I don't know that maybe they're too young to know that, but I think the student feels it. So if we're charging the standard meal price, I would rather them get whatever options they want. I mean, because it's not a different expense for us necessarily. The district is still going to be, we're still going to be in a deficit with that account regardless. I would just rather them have whatever food they want to pick, if that makes sense.
And we'll get to a couple slides down the road. It'll kind of give a little bit of insight into when we have that restricted choice versus not in terms of the financial impact.
Okay.
Because we've had our policy a couple different ways over the past few years. So that may give a little more clarity once
So what I'll do is I just wanted to ask legal on this one slide. We'll let you do the presentation and then we'll come back.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Okay, thanks.
So as I mentioned, high school, they're not getting a meal. It's an alternate option. So they're getting a cheese stick and fruit that is charged for 50 cents if they wish. It's up to them if they want to accept the alternate option. And then, of course, food services, we consistently notify families of unpaid balances through email, phone calls, and letters. And we're currently doing that twice a week for those that have negative balances. Just a reminder of the recent meal prices that were approved. So for this school year, breakfast $1.50, at K-5 $2.50 for lunch, and then middle and high school $1.75, $3. The reduced price meals for students that qualify for reduced, that's set at the federal level. It's 25 cents at breakfast, 40 cents at lunch. So the meal charge policy impact, this is specific to 27 of our schools that don't qualify for the CEP community eligibility provision. So 60 of our schools were able to offer free meals to all students. 27 currently don't qualify for that program. So this is just breaking down. We have at those 27 schools just under 1,600 students that qualify for reduced price meals. On average, about 540 of those students eat lunch on a typical day. We have just over 8,000 paid students that don't qualify for reduced or free, and on average, just over 1,200 that participate in lunch. So total students is just under 9,600 at those 27 schools that are either reduced or paid. On average, about 1,700 participate in lunch on a daily basis. I've provided you the breakdown of our current accounts and where they stand kind of by grade levels. So for elementary, to give you an example, we have 573 students at the 27 schools that have a zero balance. But I do want to make sure you understand that that could mean that they don't participate in the meal program, so they've never put money on the account. Right. Or it could mean that they had money on the account and they're currently at a zero balance. But 180 students at elementary level have a negative account, just over $1,500. So you can view those. I'm not going to go through each one, but overall district total, just over 4,000 students with a zero balance, 481 with a negative account balance, just under around $3,000 total.
I'm going to fix mine. They will be 114 students tomorrow on one of them. The milk was I didn't realize. I just got a little reminder from our online system, like, hey, by the way, you have a negative $2.50. I'll fix that.
Okay, so this is the slide I was referring to just to give you a bit of a historical perspective. So back in school year 16-17, we did have the same two-meal charge policy. This was at the K, at all of our schools, they could charge up to 2 meals on the account, and then we provided, at the time, this was before the meal charge policy legislation of the National School Lunch Program, so we were able to provide just a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, just the sandwich only. So unpaid balances from 86 schools, those peanut butter and jelly sandwiches were actually funded at the time by the schools, like PTA programs. That was definitely, I will say, from the experience, quite a challenge for a lot of schools to keep up with the funds to provide a sandwich to students that didn't have money. The total unpaid balance in that year of those two meal charges across the district was just over $22,000. But again, that was capped. They couldn't charge more than the two. School year 17-18, we changed to allowing charges. So all K through 12, there was no limit to the charge. This was 62 schools all school year, and then we added the middle and high school second quarter. We previously only allowed the elementaries to charge, but then we did expand it to all grade levels. So we ended that year just around $230,000 of unpaid balances. In school year 18-19, again, there was no charge limit. This was K-12. This was all 86 schools. We were at $365,000 for that school year. 19-20, before the pandemic, so one semester, again, this was K-12, unlimited charging for 52 schools, because at the time we did have 34 that qualified for CEP. So at the first semester mark, we were just under $350,000, which is why there was board action taken, since we were on track to be around $700,000 to $1 million in unpaid meal charges for the district. So just to give you an estimate based on that historical, if we took away allowing K-12 to charge in the negative, we currently have the 27 schools. I'm estimating that we would land around, it would basically be half of that. So for one semester, you're looking at the 125 times 2 semesters, around 250. We do see increased participation levels. Obviously, when we do allow all meals to be charged. Historically, we see about a 5% increase in meal participation just by the reduced and paid students being able to charge unlimited. So that kind of gives you a bit of a historical perspective on that. Oops. Yeah. So what are other districts doing? I always like to provide kind of surrounding information for you guys to consider. I won't go through all of this, but it does vary. Again, it's a requirement for all of us to have this. Marana, for example, there's no limit. They don't provide an alternate meal at $20 or more. They do work with the principal to get involved to try to work with families. And then high schools are not allowed to charge. Sunnyside, they allow 3 meals to be charged. After the 3 meals, they do provide an alternate meal at the K-5. They don't allow any unpaid meals at middle and high schools. You can see kind of down the list what other districts in the surrounding area, and the top largest ones in the state, I included Mesa and Chandler also. And that concludes my presentation if you have questions.
No, I appreciate it. I think that we would still be in the same negative situation, whether we provide the lunch that lunch options that are available to every student versus an alternative meal. I mean, we're still going to have the same deficit. So I would just rather that a child in our K-8 systems not be stigmatized for not having it. And if they want a grilled cheese, great. But if they wanted whatever other students were getting, I just would rather us go in that direction. Dr. Ravi.
So, thank you, Ms. Aguilar, for the presentation. Can you remind us which families this is affecting? Because this isn't affecting our most impoverished families in our district, because whatever USDA, whoever sets that goal and threshold, they get the free or reduced meals. This is affecting those who don't meet certain income thresholds and are making more in our district. Can you remind us of which families we're talking about here?
So it's based on, to qualify for the free meal program, it's 185% of the federal poverty income guidelines. So we follow, those guidelines are updated every July. So based on your household size and household income depends on if you qualify for free or reduced lunch. So yes, this charge policy does impact reduced families and then also full pay that don't qualify for either free or reduced. So yes, if they, for those that come from low-income households, they would be able to qualify perhaps for free, if not reduced.
And do you have a sense what that is for a single parent with 2 kids? What is that 185%?
Oh, it's low.
I don't have the income guidelines with me or know off the top of my head, but I can certainly provide that.
Ms. Grijalva's typing furiously. She might be looking it up.
Go ahead. Okay. Ms. Luna Rose, while I look it up.
Hi, Mrs. Aguilar. Thank you for your presentation. My question is, I know that there's a certain amount of schools that the students that attend schools, so I'll use an example, Bonias, all the students get free lunch, but if you go up the road at Rincon, which is the feeder school, well, obviously they're on the list and we see that they have to pay. So can you, for families listening that maybe are still confused, could you explain that?
Yes, absolutely. It is very confusing. So the district, we operate what's called Community Eligibility Provision, that's CEP. So it's a provision of the National School and Lunch and Breakfast Program. And what that program allows is based on the amount of students enrolled at a school that automatically qualify for free meals. That's based on SNAP benefits, so food stamps. the percentage of students at those schools is high enough where they qualify to provide free meals to all students, because there are so many students enrolled at that school that qualify already for the free meal program. They extend that benefit to that school. So in our district, we have 60 schools that qualify for that program based on the percentage of students enrolled that receive SNAP benefits. So the 27 schools where we aren't able to provide free meals to all, it's because those percentages of students enrolled at that schools is under the threshold for those that automatically qualify for free.
Okay, thank you.
One of the other issues that comes up sometimes is we have families that might be undocumented and are afraid to fill out forms that are, you know, federal looking forms, as much as we try to let families know that that's not information that, you know, we would share. You have families that definitely would qualify. They just don't fill it out for a variety of different reasons. And so I know schools are really good about reminding. I mean, I've had so many reminders, like, you haven't filled out your application. So I think that that's another issue. But ultimately, when they're K-8, it's really a parent's responsibility to either send the lunch or send the money. And so my big issue is not ensuring that our children don't feel like a stigma or different because, you know, they have a negative balance in their account. Yeah. Ms. Shaw.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. We can go back to slide 3. Okay.
This one?
There we go.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was surprised to see that there was a limit for grades K through 8, but not for high school. And it seems like, you know, maybe that should be switched. I don't believe in the limit. I think we should eliminate that because, you know, K through 8 students have less agency than our high school students. So I just hope that there's no student who might be at the limit who is not being offered a meal by their school site. And so I would urge us to eliminate that limit. And also, you know, to Ms. Grijalva's point, neglect and poverty or immigration status is not always visible. And, you know, I think that we as a governing board should do what we can to make sure that every student, regardless of income, is provided a meal that's nutritious and delicious. Although my daughter does prefer the grilled cheese to most of the regular menu items. And so I was wondering if you know how much food gets wasted every day at our schools, because I don't know how food service you know, estimates how much to cook, but are we throwing away food?
Yeah, so the way it works, and I will say start of the first month of school is definitely a challenge because obviously we go off of historical information. So we have a software system that all of our sites can utilize to help guide our staff into how many meals to prepare. But of course, we definitely never want to run out of food, especially in the beginning when we're trying to capture our participation. So our staff does ensure that we do a couple different things. So we do offer versus serve, which means that the students, we don't make them take everything. So that's an option of the National School Lunch Program. So they can come through the line and select what they want, and that does reduce waste because, for example, if they don't want the vegetable, they don't have to take it, although we encourage them to. So that's one thing. Secondly, we do batch cooking at our site. So what that means is with lunch runs, they're not preparing all 500 servings before lunch starts. They're cooking as they go, so they can adjust as needed. So we do have measures in place that if something hasn't been cooked, we can obviously store that, reuse it. But once we cook something, we do have health department regulations for food safety that really limit us on what we can do with that food once it's out of that temperature control. So our staff does work diligently to really reduce waste as much as possible. I will be honest, it's never perfect. We're never going to prepare 127 meals and serve 127. We do also, when we get audited, the state does look for that, because if we're only preparing exactly what we're serving, that indicates that we're running out of food. So we do try to limit that as much as we can. We do have our supervisory team that monitors all of our sites as far as if they're over preparing, underproducing. So we have a lot of tools with our software system that we have access into that, and it is something that we monitor consistently to ensure that we're adjusting as we need to, or working with the schools to communicate if they're we have 2 classrooms going on a field trip. Make sure you let our food service staff know so they can plan for that.
Okay, and so if there is a surplus at like one of the lunches, do this food service workers offer, since there is a stipulation on what you can do with it, are we able to offer like seconds to students if there's time?
So unfortunately, we're not allowed to offer seconds. That is part of the regulation, that we can only offer and claim 1 meal per student per day. And that also gets into some of the nutritional requirements of the program too, because we do have calorie limits that we have to ensure. Obviously, we would be exceeding that if we're giving multiple meals. I know that is hard when there's certain kids we know that could definitely use that nourishment. So that is something that we're not necessarily allowed to do with the program guidelines, but we do also have sharing tables at a lot of our schools to try to reduce waste too, that if a student does take something based on the components, they have to have a minimum of the 3 of the 5 components. If they don't want something, they could put it on a sharing table for another student that is more hungry to enjoy. So there are things. There is allowability of some donation for specific charities, organizations. Again, challenges with that get into food safety regulations as far as what we're allowed to do with food that has been cooked, and there's certain time frames that we have to utilize. But those are options that that I'm definitely interested in trying to see if there's a way. The challenge is getting it to those locations, right, when we're dispersed across 86 schools, but trying to maybe pursue some partnerships if there are homeless shelters or things nearby schools that we could definitely partner more in that area. We do currently donate some things to Gap Ministries, part of the food bank, and also the family resource centers at our district's locations.
All right, Dr. Ravi.
Thank you, President Grijalva. So I appreciate the document that you just sent in terms of the income eligibility guidelines. And so if I'm reading this correctly, a household of 4, if they're making less than $51,000 a year, then they'll qualify for a free and reduced lunch. And so they didn't make any more than $51,000. These are the families that we're talking about. And I understand some of the other barriers. I get an email every other day now from my daughter's principal in terms of fill out the form if you qualify. Like besides, these 481 students that are negative balance, besides rating their families, is there anything that's being done actively to try to enroll them in the program so that their balance would then be negative if they're enrolled in the free and reduced lunch program? Like in the language that the parents understand, like what is being done actively so that those of the 481 students that have a negative balance right now, that we're not just trying to collect money, but we're trying to enroll them in the program?
Yes, that's a great question. So the biweekly notifications that are being sent currently from food service to those parents that have a negative balance includes the direct link for the application, and it also includes our food service phone number. If they're more comfortable to call, we are more than happy to complete the application with them over the phone. We also do work with the school sites and some of the community liaisons or with the principals that if there is a feeling that perhaps, it's a barrier of that where they're just not comfortable or not sure that they want to fill out the application, trying to work at the school level more than just the food service staff and department contacting. A lot of times coming from the school, they feel more comfortable, or if there's someone at the school that they trust to help them with the application.
So it's not just like a one district-wide email form that gets sent out to the parents over and over again. There's individualized approach for language barriers and other things that are happening on the school level.
Yes, and working with refugee services, absolutely. And we do have other mechanisms for McKinney-Vento and foster students in those kind of situations as well.
So I understand why we move towards having alternative meals, and it makes sense to me if we have an alternative price. But I think since it's not going to impact our deficit, whether we change the alternative meal for breakfast and lunch for K-8, because we're still charging the same amount, I would move that we change the policy or the meal availability in grades K through 8 to allow students to pick whatever meal options they want, not limit it to all the meal options, and then, just like our really great school staff do anyway, continue to reach out to those parents. So I'd like to go ahead and move that change.
I'll second.
And so basically what it would mean is their deficit would continue to stay the same because families are still being charged the full price, even if they're receiving an alternative meal. Does that make sense, Dr. Ravi? Go ahead.
Well, it doesn't, because on slide 6, we see the difference. So we even though we're saying the deficit is going to be the same, but in slide 6, we see that when we had an alternate meal, the deficit was, unpaid balance was so much different when we didn't.
Yeah, but I also think we have more schools that are qualifying for the entire school-wide free. Don't we have more schools that qualify now this year than we did last year? So right now, our deficit is $3,000. I still have a really hard time with us limiting the options for our K through 8 students. I have a hard time with high school, but if I remember high school,
They had 46%.
they had
of the
46%
balance,
of the deficit. So I'd like to see this change, and if it becomes problematic, I mean, you're welcome to bring it back to the board and say, hey, we changed the option, but I'm just not sure if our, I just don't want our students at those young grades feeling like, they couldn't afford, they didn't have the money and couldn't get the regular lunch that their friend did. So I have a motion and a second by Ms. Luna Rose. Any additional discussion? Go ahead, Ms. Shaw.
Thank you. I sort of have a motion to kind of go off of that. I maybe should just wait for the motion, or maybe I should amend your motion.
Well, you can suggest either you can amend it or suggest like a friendly amendment, whichever you prefer.
So thank you. I would suggest that we remove the meal limit for K-8 so that there's no meal limit. Right now it's 2. Also, I agree with your motion, your original motion. Also, I would also like the alternative meal for high school to match that of K-8, which is a cheese, grilled cheese and PB&J, essentially. And I would also like us to fund all the negative balances of students each year with our ESSER funds or with one of the other funding sources that we have.
I think implied in mine is that there wouldn't be the limit. So we would offer whatever meal options to K through 8. I understand your motion, but I was here when we were looking at a really hefty deficit that we weren't really sure how we were going to be able to fund. And so
well, if with slide 6, which shows the historical meal charge information, I mean, I think the highest is almost 350,000.
So, and that was just for the first
semester.
Okay, so 600-ish thousand. I just don't want anyone to be hungry, and I think we should do what we can to make sure that students know, hey, if I want to eat this meal and like my mom keeps giving me a bag of chips, I have that option. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Dr. Ravi.
So I am not at all advocating for hungry children, so please don't get me wrong, but we're talking about middle and upper class families in TUSD, and we're talking about like almost $700,000 potentially in costs that we don't have any kind of financial analysis for. Like we're telling our middle and upper class families in TUSD, just don't pay for your meals, we're going to cover the costs anyway. Like that's what the motion on the floor is right now. And so I'm not sure if I support that, because we don't have a financial, I guess it can be up to, 700,000. We've made a big, stink about, a lot of different costs, and we raised our price for 400,000, I think, it's price savings for our meals a few months ago. And so, again, we're not dealing with our most impoverished families because they have an alternative. They have ability to sign up for free and reduced lunch. We're talking about families of means in our district that can't afford these meals, technically, but they aren't for some reason. And now we're telling all the families of means here in our district, just don't pay for your meals because we're going to cover the cost end of the year, and don't worry about your balance.
Yeah, I don't think that that's true necessarily. if you look at the income eligibility, we're not talking about families that are, wealthy. They might not qualify for free or reduced lunch if a family of 4 makes $51,000 a year. So it's not like we have, these are families that have a lot of money. But my biggest issue is we're still charging. Their account is still showing a negative balance every time they get a meal. So the numbers that we have here, the impact to our budget is going to continue to be the same if families don't send or can't send money or don't fill out the application. My biggest issue is K through 8, it really is a parent or guardian's responsibility to make sure that that child is going to eat and has money in their account. If they don't, I don't want them to go Monday, Tuesday, and they can get whatever meal they want, and then Wednesday, it's like, but I don't like grilled cheese and I don't want that. I can't eat that. It's going to make me sick, but that's the only option that they're being provided. That's my issue. And so I don't want to limit, if a child wants to, if Ms. Shaw's daughter wants grilled cheese, my daughter would probably want grilled cheese too, even if she had every other option. I just don't want in K through 8 for them to be limited to that option.
But the kids are limited in so many ways, like with technology, which tablet they have, what cell phone they have, what kind of clothes they have. Is it our responsibility to make sure that families of means, middle and upper class families, get free meals? That might be our decision. We might, as a board, say, you know what, we're going to make these meals free for everyone, stop charging. And I might actually even get behind that decision if we just make that our policy, that we're just going to pay for meals, our responsibility as a district to feed everyone, whether they're making $10,000 a year, $51,000 a year, $500,000 a year, we're going to pay for your meals, and we can have a discussion what the cost is. I feel we're making a decision for families of means, of middle and upper class families, without any financial analysis, without any kind of fiscal impact that's going to be potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars.
We do know the impact, not necessarily only for K-8. I think it's going to be less. We'll probably be looking at something closer to $150,000 a semester. And I still think that our schools are going to try to get parents, just like they do with my little deficit that my son has from getting milk, that they're going to get on us and make sure that we pay it if we can. But I just don't want our children, K through 8, to be negatively impacted because they have a negative balance. So I don't think that we're talking about families that have a lot of money. Maybe they're waiting for payday to be able to put some money on their child's account, and I don't want them negatively impacted, our children. So I'm just talking K-8. We are lifting the limit as far as 2 meals. We're going to lift that and allow our students to pick whatever meal that they like. But they're still going to be charged just like they're being charged now. And so that is my motion. And I had a second by Ms. Luna Rose?
Yeah.
Okay. And so I have a motion, a second, so I'm going to go ahead and ask for a roll call vote, please.
Dr. Ravi?
No.
Ms. Shaw?
Yes.
Ms. Counts?
Yes.
Ms. Luna Rose?
Yes.
Ms. Grijalva?
Yes, thank you. Item passes 4-1.
Okay.
All right.
Can I
Thank
make
you.
another
And-
motion, please? Sorry.
I'm sorry?
Sorry for interrupting.
Oh, I'm
May I
sorry. Go
make
ahead.
another motion?
Absolutely.
Okay, I would like to make a motion to, let's see, change the alternative meal for high school to mirror that of K-8. And also that we cover the negative balances for this upcoming school, or this school year and the next school year with our ESSER funds.
Okay, that's a motion. Yes, Dr. Trujillo.
Members of the board, because of the financial impact, because of the size and scope of what food services is going to have to do to potentially prepare hundreds of sandwiches that they don't do now because your lunch sizes are significantly larger at high schools, I would just like an opportunity for Mrs. Aguilar and her team to put together a cost analysis, because our high schools are extremely large, with most of them 800 to 1,000 kids. Well, the biggest ones are having 800 to 1,000 kids eating per lunch period. That's, number one, going to have the following impact. Probably slower times getting through the line, which could affect the instructional period right after lunch, more kids coming in a little bit later. There is a reason that it's the apple and the cheese stick, because of the volume of kids coming in and out. Then you've got food prep. So we're going to be adding the fresh preparation of, I don't know how many hundreds of sandwiches. We just want to see what that cost is going to be before the board takes action.
Okay, well, we have a motion and the item is here, but it is for that reason that I wouldn't be able to second or support it. And I understand your intention, but right now they don't have an alternative meal. It's mostly an alternative snack.
Right, okay, so I understand that point, but I wonder if instead of an alternative meal, we can just make more of the regular meal so that there are, you know, more of that, and there's no alternative at all. It's just the regular prepared meal. And please correct me if I'm wrong, but there's always a vegetarian option, right, for the hot meals?
Yes, and there's multiple depending on the grade level.
Okay.
Okay, so that was a motion by Ms. Shaw. Do I have a second? Okay, motion dies for lack of a second. And I do encourage you, Ms. Aguilar, if like there's an issue, you start to get concerned, you start to look at the deficit, and you think that it's sort of that incentive is gone for parents to pay off accounts and stuff, please feel free to come back. It's just at this point, if we're charging the same amount, I just wanted them to have access to the same. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Okay, we have 7.3 Budget Advisory Committee Membership Recommendation. Dr. Trujillo or Dr.
President
Bobby?
Grijalva, I will turn this item over to Dr. Shaw, who's the governing board's liaison and representative on the BAC.
Thank you, Dr. Trujillo. So the Budget Advisory Committee started its second year of service as an official TUSD Governing Board subcommittee. So it's been an honor serving as a board liaison to this committee now for its second year. And in its first meeting, our organizational meeting in August, we were able to support Jason Freed, one of our amazing math teachers over at Vale Middle School, as the committee chair. And there are some vacancies on the committee. We have, I believe, 2 or 3 positions that are open on the committee. And tonight we have a recommendation for Montserrat Caballero, who has a lot of experience in our community, to join the Budget Advisory Committee as a member.
Did you want to make that a motion?
I'll make a motion for that.
Okay.
I will second that one.
And Ms. Luna Rose seconds. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Item passes.
And President Grijalva, before we move out this item, we do have a few more openings available. So if any governing board members know of any individuals who would be a good fit for the Budget Advisory Committee, members of our community, not necessarily financial accountant wizards, but people who can really speak to some of the decisions we need to make as a governing board on how we address language acquisition and our ESSER funding, our TUVA programs, our capital expenditures that we are planning. Those are the main topics this year. So we're looking for some more members to join the Budget Advisory Committee. If anybody out there in streaming land is interested in joining the Budget Advisory Committee or learning more, feel free to contact me. My contact information is on the Governing Board website, and would love to discuss that opportunity with you as well.
Okay.
Ms. Grijalva.
Thank you. Ms. Luna Rose.
Yes. Dr. Shaw, how many people are you looking for on the committee?
I believe 2 more members, don't quote me, but I believe at least 1, if not 2 members.
Okay. And is there any sort of flyer or marketing material perhaps board members could have to forward to people they might?
There's no marketing material, but the information, the charter is on the website under committees along with our other committees.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. And thank you, Montserrat, for volunteering. Okay, now we are on 7.4 TUSD COVID Readiness and Response Update Policy GBGCC Update. Dr. Trujillo.
Yeah, President Grijalva, board members, I want to turn this over to our general counsel, Mr. Ross. Tonight's policy adjustment proposal represents the administration's recommendation to align our governing board policy regarding various COVID mitigation efforts to the newly enacted HB 2616. I'll turn it over to Mr. Ross at this point.
Thank you, Dr. Trujillo, and good evening, President Grijalva and governing board members. As Dr. Trujillo said, this is a proposed revision to GBGCC, and I want to take you back in time to December of 2021. Seems like a long time ago. And this policy grew out of an emergency standard from OSHA that was discussing vaccination mandates and testing. And that has largely gone by the wayside at this point. We don't need that structure the same way that we did back then to address the emergency temporary standard from OSHA. We've also, in addition to addressing, and we'll talk about this in a little more detail, about addressing state law regarding mask mandates, we also have updated the language in this policy that would be inclusive of the most recent CDC guidance, which the board addressed in a couple of meetings ago as well. So the main changes here are using the CDC guidance language regarding fully vaccinated. Now the term is up to date on vaccination. We've removed the vaccination status reporting box. At this point, everyone has told us if they're existing employees, whether they're vaccinated or not, and new hires are telling us when they come in. So that's not needed anymore. We have the language now in compliance with the CDC guidance that we need the vaccination or proof of a negative test only during high-risk times and large events when the community level is high. And again, this is from the CDC guidance that you all reviewed a couple of meetings ago. The big change here, and you'll see we've stripped this of the mask mandates because of Arizona legislative action this past session. Not one, but two bills from the legislature addressing eliminating any ability to have mask mandates. So we had House Bill 2616, which states that notwithstanding any other law, that any government entity, including a school district or charter school, may not require that a mask or face covering be worn by anyone under 18 without the express consent of the person's parent or guardian. And then there was House Bill 2453, which stated that any governmental entity cannot impose a requirement to wear a mask unless they do so for other reasons other than COVID. Long-standing workplace safety and infection control measures is the language that they used. So there are two laws that are restricting our ability to impose mask mandates. So that's what this is a revision, first reading of a revision, so the board can act or put it out for public comment. There are other options here that I just want to make sure the board is aware of. Again, this was originally designed to address the OSHA emergency temporary standard regarding vaccination. That isn't really necessary anymore. We could deal with the details that are in here in our existing regulation, EBR2T, and we also have, the board also has its general communicable disease policy, GBGCB. So there's an option to just eliminate this policy altogether and rely on the action that the board did regarding the CDC guidance a couple of meetings ago, and then we can update the regulation, the temporary regulation for COVID specifically, and then also have the fallback of the general communicable disease policy. So that's an option. Again, this is first read, although the board always can take action if it wants to in any meeting. Just one more thing, if I could. Regardless of whether the board takes action on this tonight, we have informed all the leaders in the district about the new law. So even if you put this out for comment, our advice to the leaders is going to be compliance with the new law.
Okay, Dr. Trujillo, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, not at this time. Thank you.
Okay, board members.
Ms. Grijalva?
Yes, Ms. Luna Rose.
I mean, I understand that we have to comply with the law. I just want to make a comment that I think this has been a waste of our time, in terms of it's another unfunded mandate. It goes against what we do as board members. We're supposed to be one making the policy for our district. And so to take that away from us is, once again, the state usurping its authority, and for a current legislature and a governor that says that they want small government, this is not the way to do it. So I will do what my colleagues would like to do, but I am not in favor of it.
Yeah, I'm not in favor of it either, and it also takes the authority and advisory capacity away from our Board of Health, our Pima County Board of Health. So even if, my concern is going to be when we know that a child or was positive for COVID and comes back, what can we do on a campus if we know that the child is positive? We can't require them to wear a mask. What other options do our schools have to keep the rest of our campus safe? I am very concerned, and this has always been an issue. People have the argument that students don't get that sick. Well, they do get sick, but they also can spread it to other people, and our numbers continue to increase. And at this point, the pool testing that's happening on campuses is happening because the funding is not coming from TUSD. Once it's not available, at some point I assume that is going to expire. Once that's not available, free testing in our community has dropped significantly because federal funding isn't there. And so, if you don't have the insurance available, our pool testing might be one of the only ways that some of our families find out that COVID is in their household. So I'm glad that we're continuing to participate in that, but I am very concerned when we know that someone is positive or let you know that they're positive for COVID and there isn't any sort of protection that we can provide any of our staff or students. And I don't. Okay, well, the law goes into effect September 24th. Everyone seems ready to jump and vote on this item, I have to say. I'm frustrated, very frustrated, because so what we used to have before as an option, and what the CDC recommends is you stay home for 5 days and then you can come out in the community wearing a mask for 5 days. So at this point, could we ask people, students, let's say if you were tested positive, you had symptoms, you were home for 5 days, come back to school and we ask you to wear a mask, or we can't even ask them at this point? On September 25th, let's go with that.
On September 25th, my recommendation is asking a child to wear a mask is going to be risky. The informing people of the recommendation of the health authorities, I think, is legitimate.
Dr. Ravi.
Thank you, President Grijalva. I have so many thoughts on this issue. Let me see how I can condense that down right now. I mean, our memories are very short-lived. Like, we're in a really good point right now in the green zone. We've been in the green zone for a while. Luckily, summer is happening. But we remember what January was like. January was a really challenging time. We heard from teachers and our teacher leaders. We heard from parents. We heard from the media. This was in the news in terms of when we had teacher shortages because people were spreading COVID and getting infected. And I hope we don't get there again. And I hope that we can remain in green zone with our numbers as low as they are and our hospital capacity as low as it is. But we're getting into a winter season. As a physician in our community, I'm already seeing flu. I've diagnosed flu in patients already. So we're already seeing some of our communicable diseases that we don't normally see this early, spreading in our community in a level that we haven't in usual years. We're still seeing positive cases of COVID coming through on a regular basis and folks with symptoms. And this really ties our hands from being able to use the best public health information we have to try to limit spread of COVID. Again, this isn't, as you mentioned earlier, I think it was you, President Grijalva mentioned, this isn't about kids getting sick and being in the hospital and having severe illness. This is about the spread of a communicable disease that is going to affect family members they come home to. My kids come home to a family member. My father lives at home with us, so we're always cognizant of what we're bringing home to our family in our home. And many families that are in this situation are teachers that range in age levels and health statuses, and this is really tying our ability to really do one of the most important things we can in terms of having schools that are safe for our students, our staff, and our teachers, and the families they come home to. That's our, we can't address academic achievement. We can't address psychosocial, stability unless we're making sure we have safe environments for our students and teachers and staff to be in. So this really ties our hand. And what can we do tonight? What can we do tonight to stay compliant with the law, so we don't put our district in jeopardy in terms of being out of compliance with state law, which we all disagree with, as well as following CDC guidelines and making sure we limit the spread to what we can. And so I think we have I have a couple of motions that I'll probably make in the course of this discussion, and do the best that we can to try to limit this, because I don't want to be here in February having to respond to, all the news stations and all the cell phone images and everything of, students in cafeterias because our teachers are calling out sick because they're exposed and have illness, or our students that are missing more school because they have more exposure from folks who should be either staying home or masked because they are COVID positive 6-7 days ago and are still spreading COVID. And so this is a really challenging situation. And for those who are listening, we have a choice in a couple of months to elect folks who are actually going to follow public health science and are going to make sure their school districts can do what we can to limit the spread of COVID, so we're not spreading communicable diseases of COVID, or maybe monkeypox next, or maybe some other disease, flu this season, if we have a bad flu season. And this ties our hands from being able to do anything in our schools to really limit the spread of communicable disease, and that is just an anthem to what we should be doing as a community and to making sure we have safe environments.
So, I don't see people jumping to move or second this item. So, we don't really have options at
Yeah,
this
I was
point.
going to ask Mr. Ross, what is the penalty, like if we don't do what the state wants us to do?
I did provide that information in an executive session.
Correct.
If the board as a whole wants me to discuss that. I
Okay,
would.
Right.
we don't have to, that's fine.
I will, you asked about other options, and I mentioned our communicable disease policies. We actually have two. We have the one for employees, GBGCB, and we also have JLCC. This isn't the preferred approach, but if someone is not going to wear a face covering as recommended by the CDC when they're in that particular post-positive situation, those policies allow for exclusion from school. That's not obviously that's not what we're about, but that's what we're left with, in terms of a response to protect the environment. Again, that's not optimal, obviously. When there's an alternative that's less restrictive.
Less restrictive. Okay. I'll go ahead and move the revisions to Governing Board Policy GBGCC.
I'll second.
So I have a motion and a second by Dr. Ravi.
President Grijalva, before we vote on this, I'm going to make a second order, or I'm going to make an amendment to that. I want to make an amendment to also rescind student code JICA, student dress code, because apparently the state says we can't really wear masks. So how can we as a school board require any clothes requirements in our schools? How can we force any parents to force their kids to have shoes, shirts, pants, underwear? So I'm going to make an amendment to that to rescind policy JICA, or student dress code.
Since we didn't notice any discussion about that policy, can we legally make the amendment? Like, for transparency's sake, should we?
I would be concerned about that. Yes.
Okay. I understand the frustration, Dr. Ravi. I do. Unfortunately, I don't, we didn't notice any discussion about it. But if you want to bring that back in the next meeting, let's go ahead and do that.
I hope the audience understands the facetiousness of that motion.
I understand.
But if we can't require a 5-inch mask to help support, public health safety,
Right.
I just want to.
well, how is it not tyranny to require any clothing for our students?
And I would have seconded that motion if that had been an option,
I wasn't expecting a second.
just to make a point.
Okay. We'll just do it. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Item passes unanimously. Okay.
So this is for posting for public comment as a first read revision, or?
No, I think we need to get this
We just
Okay.
need to get it out
Thank you.
to
stay
staff.
compliant with our laws.
Does anyone have an issue with that? I mean, as far as just putting it out, because we don't really have the time to post. Okay.
So, Ms. Grijalva, I have 2 other motions on this topic.
Okay, go ahead, Dr. Ravi.
So another motion would be to update our isolation and quarantine policy to require a 10-day isolation and quarantine, because the current requirements from the CDC require masking after day 5. And so we can't require that. We know that our students, staff, and others are still infectious at day 5. We know infection rates go down significantly after day 5, but they're still infectious after testing positive and being positive for COVID. And the masking is reducing spread. And since we can't require that, I would make a motion to change our isolation and quarantine policies to a 10-day policy.
I will second that one.
I'm concerned.
Yeah. Can we have,
I don't wanna keep
can I
kids out of school
get
for
some
that long.
legal advice, Dr. Trujillo?
Yeah, I've asked Rob to weigh in. I know that the state does have the 10 consecutive absence rule before we have to drop, but I'm not sure if that applies to, which would amount to an excused absence because it's us triggering the absence. So I'd ask Rob to weigh in here.
Yeah, Dr. Trio, I'd want to look at that, do some research on that. I don't think that the excused is really the issue. I'd be concerned about. I want to look at that, but I definitely get the issue there of trying to correct the mistake.
And
I'm sorry, what's the issue? Because we have a 5-day policy right now.
Right. So the state requires if there's a student doesn't attend for 10 days, then they're automatically dropped from the rolls of the district. And I want to make sure that this won't trigger that.
Well, that's for an unexcused absence, so this shouldn't be for an illness or something that's documented. So how is that relevant here?
Well, are we going to get a doctor to say that they should be out for that long? I hope so.
Well, no, I mean, this is just our policy. Like, you test positive for COVID and you're COVID positive, then you need to isolate for 10 days.
I'm just saying, as the lawyer, I want to be sure that we're not going to have an issue there with dropping those students.
Mm-hmm.
I apologize. I'm just trying to understand what the issue is, because this is an excused absence. This is a policy.
will a doctor give an excuse, or is it a parent saying that they would excuse it? I think that's his question.
Do we require a doctor's excuse for the 5-day policy or anything? Like, I mean, how's that relevant?
I'm trying to protect us against losing funding for students. So I want to be sure. My instinct is that it'll be okay, but I don't want to have the board do this and then have me come up with some reason why it could be a problem.
Right.
Okay, Ms. Shaw.
Thank you. Also, it would be penalizing students because you're upset at our government, and I don't want to do that, although I understand your sentiment.
I think what I was hoping for is we could have something akin to like an abeyance contract. So like you are out 5 days, and if you'll wear a mask, then you can come back to school. What if someone tests negative? A bunch of people that I know that recently had COVID were testing negative at day 5. Does that matter? I mean, I'm just asking questions because I don't want to kick our students out, but I understand that there's no other real way for us to protect our staff and other students without having that 10-day recommended period of time. All right, we have a motion and a second. The only concern that I have, and the reason why I'm going to vote no, would you be willing to bring this back next week so we can make sure that Mr. Ross could do a legal kind of opinion for the 10-day unexcused absences?
I'm going to vote in favor of it right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And if it gets approved or not, that'll be the board's decision.
I understand. Okay, we're gonna,
If I may, one more question.
go ahead,
Do
Ms.
we have the ACS system still up and running to be able to handle an influx of these students who may be quarantining for 10 days?
Dr. Trujillo.
That's going to be an infrastructure upgrade because I know that we downsized the ACS program, and we don't know what capacity TUVA would play at this point for an absence that long. But that's certainly something we can come back, follow up on.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Can I ask for a roll call vote, please?
Dr. Ravi?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw?
No.
Ms. Counts?
No?
Ms. Luna Rose?
Yes.
Ms. Grijalva?
No. Item fails 3-2.
Ms. Grijalva, I have one more motion.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, my last motion on this topic is to stop the COVID pool testing in our schools. And so we've been really clear throughout the entire pandemic, or at least it's not been on the board, that we're following CDC recommendations on how to mitigate spread of COVID. And the CDC specifically writes that CDC no longer recommends routine screening testing in K-12 schools. And so right now, this is for asymptomatic carriers of COVID. And so if we're following CDC requirements or recommendations, then we should stop routine screening of asymptomatic individuals in our schools. So my motion is to stop our COVID pool testing.
Okay, it's a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, Ms. Count seconds. I can't support this because we really don't have readily available free testing in our community. And so for some families, this is the only way you know whether you have symptoms and are testing positive. And even if you're asymptomatic, that doesn't mean that you can't spread it. So, and I understand that your recommendation, because we have, in general, as a board, followed CDC guidelines. But since our state is making it incredibly difficult for us to have any other mitigation, this is one of sort of the last bastions of it. So I have a motion and a second. I'll ask for a roll call vote.
Oh,
Well, Ms.
I
Gravel, I
thought
can say a
I'm
few
sorry.
more things.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, Ms. Shaw, go ahead.
Just a comment. I just don't understand. Your two motions are kind of contradictory, Dr. Shaw, because one, you want to increase the quarantine time, and the other, you want to eliminate the small amount of pool tests that we have that might, keep some students out for a 5-day quarantine who might be testing positive. So in essence, you want to keep students out, but then you want to spread the virus. So I will be voting against this motion.
Okay.
So I think some of the rationale behind what the
Go
CDC
ahead,
is
Dr.
recommending
Ravi.
here, this is for asymptomatic
Who can
spread
still
of
spread.
COVID, right? So this is for individuals without symptoms. There are tests available. I saw a post from a friend on Facebook today that they got 3 free tests from a library. And so our libraries are carrying COVID tests, and there's a lot of testing available throughout our community for those who are symptomatic. And so the CDC is no longer recommending routine screening testing in K-12 schools, which means that if you're asymptomatic, you're not testing routinely, because if you're asymptomatic carrier, you're less likely to spread it, you're less likely to have it. And even in high community levels, it's still recommended against it. We can do it in high-risk activities when there's close contact. So I'm trying to stay consistent with the CDC recommendations here. None of us on the governing board are public health experts. I would even say that of myself, who has an MPH and has been a physician for 20 years, I still wouldn't consider myself a public health expert. And so the best we can do as a governing board is look at the recommendations from our public health bodies and follow the recommendations. And so we're going to try to implement one recommendation and not another, then we need to justify that somehow. I don't think we have a justification to follow one CDC recommendation and not this one. And so I would recommend against the routine screening because the CDC has looked at the data and looked at what the benefit and risk of doing that is, and that's negligible. And again, in terms of the quarantine isolation, whether there is someone, and I would imagine that most of the kids who are doing the pool testing are already vaccinated, just based on conversations I've had. If they're vaccinated, they're asymptomatic and they test positive and they now have to miss school, why would we do that to that family that's asymptomatic, vaccinated carrier, and they probably would mask anyway. And so I think we're doing more harm than good with this routine pool testing.
Yeah, I guess my issue is, yes, libraries have them, USPS have mailed them, but that's not, it's a supply chain issue and they're not guaranteed. A lot of our libraries run out really quickly for the larger population. And I mean, I don't have enough. Like, we used to have, 3 at our house, but there's 5 of us. So we have to sort of use them sparingly. And the pool testing with my children once a week at school has really helped make us feel a little bit safer. And, we are around, my children are around their grandparents who, are higher, some of them are higher risk with different issues. And it is a small little safety. I feel a little safer when I bring them around. So,
Ms. Grijalva?
Yes, Ms. Luna Rose.
Thank you. With the pool testing, where did we, remind me if the board, did we voted on to go through the rest of this school year? Is it like, are we still contracted? Is it month
No,
to month?
the state funded it.
Right.
So we're contracted until we have a funding issue. And once we have a funding issue, it will come back. And in all likelihood, once that funding is not available, we don't have the resources to be able to support it. And so it will run its course, I'm assuming.
Okay.
We do have a contract with a vendor, but
right.
One that they're being paid for out of state funds.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions or comments? Okay, I'll go ahead and ask for a roll call vote, please.
Dr. Ravi?
Yes.
Ms. Shaw?
No.
Ms. Counts?
I think you called me. I'm sorry it's cutting out, but I'm going to vote no.
Ms. Luna Rose?
No.
Ms. Grijalva?
No. Item fails 4-1. Okay. Very difficult item. We have did anyone want to take a quick break, or are we going to power through? All right. 8.1, school year 22-23, opening of schools, facilities update. Dr. Trujillo.
President Grijalva, board members, it's probably going to be, I think this is our final item of the evening. We wanted to provide an update. We've got our facilities director, Greg Meyer, here. We know that 2 of the hottest topics in the district for our employees and our families is the state of the district's HVAC systems around the district, as well as custodial and grounds. Unfortunately, these are 3 areas where we have just struggled with the labor shortage. So I've asked our facilities director here to kind of give us an update on what the first 30 days of school have been, the challenges, and of course the accomplishments. Mr. Meyer, you are on.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and good evening, President Grijalva, Clerk Luna Rose, board members, Dr. Trujillo, and Council Mr. Ross. So tonight, I'm here to give you all an update in terms of how facilities did with the startup of school. So if we can go to the next slide. So here's the agenda. We're going to talk about HVAC, we're going to talk about the grounds and custodial. So I've got some pretty exciting things to talk to all of you about tonight, so let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing that I want to review with all of you is our heating and cooling support model. I believe that you are aware that we have contracted with 6 contractors to help us with HVAC. And so what it means is that we have 1 contractor in each of our 5 regions, and we have another one as a backup as well. So this particular support model has really helped us because the contractors have been able to come in and help us address issues a lot quicker, and so we're really happy about that part of it. So in terms of the priorities that we use when a work order comes in is we have to prioritize according to emergencies, high priorities, and regular priorities. So I'm not going to read through all of that right there, but it gives you a good idea of where particular issues fall and how we're going to respond. So for example, on an emergency, we have to take care of those particular items immediately. On the high priorities, the service level agreement there is 5 days that we need to go ahead and address those issues. And on the regular priorities, it's a 10-day. So that's how we've got it set up right now. And again, just to make sure we're clear on this, that means that we go out and address it within that period of time. we may not be able to solve the issue within that period of time, but we go out and address it so that we know exactly what direction that we have to go. So we'll go on to the next slide here. So this is the decision tree that we use. So when a work order comes in, we start asking questions. And so depending on what the answer is, if it's a yes, we go to one side. If it's a no, we continue with the decision tree. And that gets us to a point where we know if we're going to be able to handle the work order internally, or if we're going to need to send it out to a contractor to be addressed. Okay, so next slide. So right now, as of last week, we have 298 open work orders with our contractors, and we have 319 open work orders internally. So that's a lot of work orders that are open, and it definitely is a reflection on where we're at with HVAC in the district. The systems in general are old. We have a lot of equipment that is at the end of its service life. We have a lot of equipment that is actually exceeding the end of service life. And so we try to do the best we can with what we have in order to keep the units running and to keep everybody comfortable, because of course that is very important to us. And so we're doing our best with that. But the other issue too that you need to be aware of is our equipment control systems that we use to monitor and control the equipment, because right now we have a total of 6 different platforms that we use with our what we call our EMCS. And so we have these different platforms, which in itself creates variability because of all those different platforms that are used to control the equipment. And out of that 6, there's actually 2 that aren't even supported anymore. So they're going to have to be replaced. I mean, you know, we have to rely on our own folks and their knowledge in order to work with those particular systems. So that's not a good thing at all. So what we hope to do is get this to a point where we have one system only throughout the district. So that will allow us to reduce variability and increase the reliability of those systems, because that's very critical in our ability to take a look at these incoming work orders and to evaluate them quickly. So that's kind of where we're at in terms of the HVAC and what's going on with the work orders. Next slide, please. So in regard to the progress that we've made and also the challenges that we have on the HVAC side of things, under the progress that we've made, we hired 4 additional preventative maintenance techs to help us with preventative maintenance on the units. And I think in the long run, that's definitely going to help us. The second one here is that we completed 21 retro commissioning projects. So what that means is that we had contractors come in and deep dive into the systems in 21 of our sites. I think that 21, it doesn't actually represent 21 schools. I think there were a couple support sites that we retro commissioned as well, but that's worked out well in the past. And so I need to you know, do some monitoring of that and make sure that we're going to have a good result with that particular program. So the next thing then is this one is in advance of school. What we did is we sent out our custodial supervisors with temperature guns, and we had them go out and check every single classroom in the district so that we would have just another check that we could use in order to identify some particular problem before the start of school, because we wanted this to go off as well as it possibly could. So kudos to our custodial supervisors for going out and getting us that information. So then under the challenges, we still have 7 open HVAC vacancies. And so the starting wage now is $22.04 an hour. And I think that's very competitive with the other public entities here in Tucson. And so we're going to have to just stay on target with this. We have to be aggressive with our efforts to get additional folks to come in and help us, because that's what we really want to do. So that was one of the areas that did get increased, and so we're hopeful that that's going to help us. We haven't seen that result yet, but we're definitely working towards that. So the next challenge, of course, that we have is just our ability to replace these old HVAC systems. But it's all, you know, it's something that can't be done overnight, and it certainly depends on what funding that we have available. So We have to look at all the available funding sources and try to replace wherever we possibly can. So, and of course then, what it really comes down to is that when you have an outdated infrastructure, you're going to have a lot more breakdowns, and there's no doubt about that, and we see that on a daily basis. So we'll go on to the next slide. So going on to grounds, as you can see up here now, this is just a summary of where we're at in terms of vacancies within the department. Of course, the big one is the grounds workers. So we have 10 right now, but we have vacancies of 17 and a half. And so this one, I think on our next slide, let's just go on to that. And well, actually, I guess it's going to be in another slide here, but let me go through this first. In terms of our ground support, we have contracted with a supplemental contractor on 42 of the sites that you see up there. So we're actually getting help from this contractor at those particular schools. And so that has worked out on the most part pretty well, but I need to speak to that a little bit further as well. So let's go on to that next slide. This is what I really wanted to get to here. So as far as the progress on the grounds department is concerned, first let me say this. Our department definitely appreciates the fact that the board stepped up and gave us funding for equipment that we desperately needed, especially out in the high schools. And so that is very much appreciated, to have good equipment in the hands of our folks, our employees. I know they were appreciated a lot. And so the only thing left there for the high schools is the mowers. I was told they were supposed to be in this month. I don't know how long we've waited, probably about a year to get these mowers. And so it's about time they come in. So when we get those out there, we'll be complete with the equipment for the high schools. Now in terms of I need to clarify that one just a little bit up there. In terms of the grounds department, we still need our trailers that were approved. We need a utility truck, and we also need a dump truck yet. So that's all been dependent on availability. So we're working on that, and we'll certainly try to get that completed as soon as we can too. So those are big things, and we certainly appreciate the help with that. The next thing, our phase 2 of that whole presentation I gave was on landscaping. And so where we're at on that right now is our first project was over at Borton, and that team has identified where they want to work there. They want to work on the area around their marquee out there on 22nd Street. So that one is coming along. We took our time with that because we wanted to make sure that we had a good process in place to go through the landscaping projects. So we were shaking out some ideas. We took our time. And so now we're ready to move on. We've contacted 5 more schools across the district to notify them that they're next on the list for landscaping improvement. So, and part of that is what we're going to be focusing on is xeriscaping of the landscaping, and also water harvesting as well. And so really important in the desert, of course, especially with the shortages of water that we have here in the desert. So those are important things that you all need to know about as well. And then the next one down here, the final one, is we did complete resurfacing of the Pueblo and Cholla High School football fields. And so the next slide shows you what Pueblo looks like there. They came out very well. I have to apologize to the Cholla community. I did have a photo, but it didn't quite make the cutoff for the presentation. So I'll have to come back later and with a photo of the Cholla football field. Okay.
Can I ask a question about the football fields?
Okay.
There were some issues there where it wasn't just a simple, adding grass, that kind of thing, that there were some safety concerns. With the resurfacing, were those addressed?
They certainly were.
Okay,
Yep.
great. Thanks.
And the feedback I've been getting on that is very positive. And yeah, there are definitely issues with that. And so now the challenge is going to be keeping those fields in the shape they need to be kept in. So that will be something that we're going to continue to work on, and we need to make sure that gets done.
Yep.
So
thanks.
Okay. And finally, I think, so in regard to our challenges, here again, what I wanted to allude to from before was that in regard to these vacancies that we have, the groundskeepers now are starting at $16.16 an hour, which we feel it's very competitive in Tucson, and so it's just a matter now of being able to recruit folks into those positions. So if anybody knows anybody that needs a landscaping job, we'd certainly like to talk to them, because we'll get them in and interview them as fast as we can, I guarantee you that. And so it's just a matter of staying on that one, because we're competitive. There's no doubt about it. The next one here, the comment I wanted to make about supplemental.
These positions, I'm sorry, with grounds.
Yes.
They're full-time with benefits. Okay.
Absolutely. Yep. Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, they certainly are. So in regard to that supplemental contractor, we are experiencing some service issues with them, so we're trying to get that straightened out right now. But the thing is that we may need alternative options here, so I'm going to keep those options open, because we're paying for that service and we need to make sure that it's acceptable and that the schools are happy with that. So we are having some issues, but we're addressing them. So that's really, I think, let's see if we go on to the next slide. Yeah, okay, that was it for the grounds. And so now the last part of the presentation is on custodial. And so I'm hoping that maybe you all can see this just a little bit better than I can on the screen up here. But at the beginning of the summer, we decided that our priority one in the schools in terms of custodial was going to be to go after our floors and to do some good maintenance on our floors. So what you're looking at right here is Dodge Magnet School. And so we made our priority to go in there and restore the floors there. And so over on the left-hand side, it's a little hard to see, I think, maybe, but at the bottom of the screen, or the bottom of that photo, you can see where there's a kind of a brown tint to that floor. And what that is, that's built up wax. And you should never see that on a floor. Absolutely not. And so what you see at the upper part of that photo is the floor that has been stripped. And so it's kind of at this point, it's kind of a dull looking look to it, but much better than the brown discoloration that we see down at the bottom of that photo. The other two photos to the right show you examples of how that floor looked after the custodians went in there and did the work. And so I have to say I'm really proud of the custodians. They did a great job. It was a lot of work to get those floors back into shape. But what's important for all you to know is that when you go into a school and you step into that foyer, you should not see this brown discoloration in the floor, because that's built up wax and that's not acceptable. We're just not going to do that. And so what you see over there on the right-hand side, now that's the way all the floors in this district should look. So that's the goal, and we're not stopping until we get that accomplished. So it's going to take some time to make that happen, but that's the goal. So we'll go on to the next slide. And so these are some recommendations now that we have for improvement. So the first thing is that we're suggesting that the regional superintendents meet with our regional custodial supervisors, and I think in some cases they might even want to meet a little bit more than quarterly, but this is in an effort to make sure that they get the updates on their schools so that they know who's doing very well and who needs additional help. So that's the reason why we're suggesting that we do that, to keep that line of communication open. And then we also want to make sure that we're exploring opportunities to do additional work, and that would be during the fall and spring breaks, because we have those weeks, and we can certainly use that time wisely in order to improve the look of the schools. And then finally, I think you'll all be really glad to hear this. We're bringing back the Cleanest School competition program that we had before. I think some of you remember what we were doing there in terms of creating competition between the schools to see who had the cleanest school, and then reward them somehow with plaques or whatever it might be, a trophy or something along that line. I guess we haven't decided for sure. But anyway, it's good to have competition out there, especially when it comes to something like this. And I think that we really will see some benefits from doing that as well. So we're looking forward to bringing that back. Okay, and then the next slide would be the question slide. So if anyone has any questions.
I think that what I saw with the Cleanest School, and I noticed it when I go on site visits, is that just acknowledging like the hard work that it's taken to keep the school looking like that. And some of the floors, some of it is, I'm just wondering how often we're providing professional development and training on how to use different cleansers, different materials. I know that when I first started on the board 20 years ago, I walked around with custodial crews and they told me, okay, so this is why we do this. This is why it's so important to give us opportunities to train. This is why, you know, it takes so long to become a supervisor. And I think in general, a lot of opportunities have been made available to our staff, you know, vacancies and all of that, but some of that training went away. And so I have a friend of mine that graduated from high school with me, and we were talking about our alma mater. It's like, I went over there and they were wanting to just redo the entire, you know, entire sink system or whatever. And really all it was is that the person, the custodian at the time, wasn't familiar with some of the chemical like cleansers that would be able to make it look brand new. So he worked on it, and then I guess the principal went in and said, oh my gosh, you got us brand new stuff. It's like, no, I just put a little elbow grease and used this and it totally worked. So, and I know that maybe it's not, I know that we have some really hardworking people, but just to make sure that they have the resources that they need available, because I think that from my understanding on some of our site visits, some of the buildup of wax was really lack of the proper equipment. And so they were trying to hand do it, and it just isn't the same as some of the other, you know, options that we have available. I'm glad to see that Dodge got some attention. I've always, we each have schools that we visit and realize need attention, and Dodge is one of our magnets and one of our really high demand schools, and we want to make sure that, you know, when people go to do site visits that we're putting our best foot forward. So that's why I appreciate so much the updates, because it is something that people look at. I used to get calls about a certain school on a really busy road and asked if it was closed because there were so many weeds or so many this or so many that. So I'm getting a lot less of those calls, which I appreciate. So thanks for everyone who's working on this. Any questions? Ms. Shaw and then Ms. Luna Rose.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for the presentation, sir. Looking back at one of the slides about the response times, you know, and if we could go back to the response time slide, I think it's at the beginning. But I am concerned with the 10-day response time for classroom issues, and I know, you know, and I understand the reasoning for that, and I'm sure we're still strapped for people to respond to these, even with the contractors. And so have we been able to honor the response times for the most part for HVAC issues? And is there any like wiggle room to reduce the regular priorities to less than 10 days? Because, you know, I've experienced many summers without AC, and it does make it difficult to do things. And I don't want our students to, you know, have their education hampered for days on end because there's no AC.
Yeah, and that's a good question. And so I would say there that we've been doing a pretty darn good job as far as honoring those SLAs, especially from the contractor side of things. And so I think out of all the work orders that they've addressed, I think there were only 2 that didn't actually meet that SLA. And so I think that we need to look at that just a little closer, but I think that especially on that 10-day that you're referencing, I think that there definitely could be some wiggle room there. I'm going to have to look at it just a little bit closer, because we've only, I guess I failed to mention that we basically started this back in July. I mean, officially, we were doing some tweaking before July with some of this, but we really started paying attention and looking at the results then starting in July. So we've had about a couple months to look at this, but so far that looks pretty promising that we can probably ratchet that down some more. And so I think that, but again, I appreciate you bringing that up, because that's something that we definitely want to address and see what we can do there.
Yeah, and he's also, I just saw that kitchens was on the regular priority too, and like, you know, when you're cooking, it just gets hotter and hotter, and so yeah, if we could bring that response time down, that would be fabulous. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Luna Rose.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Michelle. I was going, you kind of stole my thunder there. So, but I did want to just more make a comment. I really appreciate, I know that the grounds and custodials, if anybody's from those departments watching, thank you so much for doing what they do every day. I know my daughter was coming home every day saying, it's really hot in my science class, Mom, and she thinks that I can snap my fingers because of where I sit here on the dais, and obviously we can't. So I just want to say thank you to the crew and everybody for their hard work. I did have a question in terms of, let's see if I can go back to the slide. I have it right here. So could you actually, I remember the Cleanest School competition, but could you go into a little bit more detail for those people who maybe not really aware what that exactly means? And
Yes.
is there an award afterwards? Or?
Yeah, you know, and thanks for bringing that up, because the way it works is that our custodial supervisors go out and they rate the schools. And basically what it is they have a checkoff sheet, and we have a number of different elements of cleanliness that they look at, and then they rate it. I don't remember for sure if it's like good, bad, or ugly, or I'm not really sure exactly, you know, what it is there, because I haven't looked at it for a while. But I do know that there's a form that they use, and then the conditions are scored is what it is. So then based on those scores, that tells us where that school's at in terms of their overall cleanliness. So what the idea is that you use those scores then that the custodial supervisors go out and do as part of their inspections, and that's what's used to determine, okay, which of the schools in a particular region have the highest scores, and then that's what they really want to get to as far as making an award for like the cleanest school in a region as an example. Now, we've also thrown out some other ideas. We would do this like for high schools, for example. It would just be the high schools that would be competing there for one award there. But I think it might be better, really, and we were just talking about that here recently, I think it would be better if there was one award for every region. And then maybe they have the semifinals, and then we go into the big, you know, end of it where, you know, you got all 5 of them out there. And it could get pretty interesting, I think, because they're very competitive. The schools are competitive, and they like to have plaques up on their walls. There's one in particular, I don't know if I need to mention it, but there's one in particular, they have them right inside the door when you walk in. And so even when I was out a few weeks ago, a couple principals, they said, Greg, what's up with, you know, the cleanest school award thing? Remember how we were doing that before? They were asking me about it. So I know that they're really interested. And I think that, again, competition is good. And I think it just really helps keep our schools the way they need to look, because it's really important to us.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Any other questions? Ms. Shaw.
Thank you. In regards to the Cleanest School competition, I think it's a great idea, but I want to make sure that, you know, there's equity involved with, like, you know, does this school have as many custodians as that one? And does that like, I assume that the students are also a part of the Cleanest School competition. Like, are they helping to keep their school clean just in the normal way, or are they invited to, you know, do added duty as, I don't know, how does it work? Is it just like the custodians are working on it, or is it just the entire school population?
Well, I would say if I was a principal, I would probably be enlisting the kids to help with that effort, because they're out there and they should learn how important it is to keep things picked up and not having trash laying all over and whatever. I mean, it's a matter of respect. And so if I was the principal, I would certainly engage them. I think that's a very good point. And so, of course, we hope all of our principals are listening tonight, because I think that that would be a really good idea to try to get them involved in it and to really push that side of it. I think that would be really helpful. So that's a very good point.
Okay, thank you. And just one more question. Is there any interest? I know there's interest from me, but are you all looking, or can you look into having us switch to green pesticides like diatomaceous earth instead of the chemicals? Because I know visiting some school sites, I see like the pesticide alert posted on some of the doors, and this is some elementary schools, and I'm very concerned about it. can we make our schools greener by using green pesticides
You know, that's a good
exclusively?
question too, and I'd have to do some research on that because I'm not an expert on that side of things at all, and so I would definitely need to do some research and to let you know what we might be able to do with that, because anytime that we can make things safer for the kids and the staff, we certainly want to go in that direction. And so, but I think we kind of have to balance that a little bit in terms of making sure that those green chemicals can, or you know, substances, whatever, that they can still get the job done that we need to have done too. And so, but I think that we would have to just take a look at that and do some more research and see what could be done with that. So yeah, I mean, we can certainly check into that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I remember that Monzo might have switched to a green pesticide because of one of the parents raised the issue. And so if, you know, you might want to explore what they're doing.
I think that's a good thing for me to know because they do a lot of interesting things at Monzo.
Yeah.
They do.
And, you know, with all the, I don't know, they have that area out there with the chickens and all this and whatever. And so I guess that doesn't really surprise me that they're doing some kind of innovative things there. So they really put a lot of effort into all that over there at that site. So, yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? All right, thank you so much.
Okay,
I appreciate the
thank
update. All right, and now we're on future meeting dates and agenda items. Dr. Trujillo.
Yes, governing board members, in looking at the amount of proposals that will require a performance impact analysis and that we want to try and get before the governing board before open enrollment season, I do think that an additional meeting is necessary. I'm going to be asking the board to consider an additional meeting on Tuesday, November 29th. Our preference is to clear the Thanksgiving holiday break, but then also to clear the opening of December, which we know is a trying time for everybody in the district. So that's my ask here this evening.
Okay. So I don't think we have to vote on the item, do we? Can we just, it can just be added to our calendar?
Vote. You do vote on your meeting calendar. So.
Okay.
Ms. Grijalva?
Yes, Ms. Counts.
I'm wondering if there's any objection to changing it to the 30th of December or the 1st, I'm sorry, the 30th of November or the 1st of December, that Wednesday or Thursday?
Dr. Trujillo.
So the alternative is, what are the dates again?
Either the next day, the 30th, or that following day, the Thursday, the December 1st.
We don't have any issues with the 30th.
Okay.
Board members, no.
prefer to keep it
We're
on the
hearing.
29th.
I can't do that.
Dr. Ravi can't do, could you do the 29th? Can we do the 29th, board members?
I can't do the 29th.
Okay.
I can, but I couldn't do the 1st.
Okay, so can you do the, I'm sorry,
But I could do the 29th
the 29th?
or
Okay.
30th.
Can anybody do the 30th or the 1st?
I can, but Dr. Ravi is.
I have my kids those 2 nights.
And Dr. Ravi can't, and Miss Luna Rose has a conflict,
I can't.
and Miss Shaw can't. I'm sorry.
All right.
Okay.
Okay, is there any way, is anybody available on the 28th?
That's the Monday. I have a conflict with another board on that day. But,
So Dr. Trujillo, I can't make it on the 29th, and I really would like to be there for that, meeting particularly. Near and dear to my heart, so.
can anyone else, can you all do the 28th? Dr. Ravi can.
I can.
Miss Luna Rose can. Miss Shaw, could you do that Monday, the 28th?
I have an ongoing meeting every Monday
Okay.
at 6, but no, I can't.
So it appears that the 29th is the one that there's 4 of us that are available.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Perhaps, Dr. Trujillo, you could review the agenda with Ms. Counts because we do have a meeting on that 6th. And if there's a specific item that she wants to be able to vote on, maybe you can move the agenda items around?
Absolutely, I will work with.
Okay. All right. Sorry, Ms. Counts.
That's all right, thank you.
Okay. All right,
And
so,
I have,
yes, I'm sorry.
I would
Michelle.
like an add an item to a future agenda, if I may.
Yeah, can we vote on whether to
Oh.
add this date to our calendar?
Yes,
Really
sorry.
quick? Okay. So I'll go ahead and move that we're adding a special meeting on Tuesday, November 29th.
I'll second.
And say, I have a motion and a second by Ms. Luna Rose. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, item passes unanimously. Ms. Shaw.
Thank you. I would like to add to a future agenda a review of the district's dress code policy.
Okay.
Yeah, and I was going to do this before you made mention of that, just because I know some of our schools are interpreting our dress code policy in their own way, so I would like us to maybe standardize it.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I have a motion to add that item. Do I have a second?
We don't need a second.
We
on
don't
that.
really. We could just add it for discussion. Okay.
Yeah, we can make sure and add
Just
the
a study item. All
Absolutely.
right, any other?
Just a couple
Yes,
of
Dr. Trujillo.
items for the viewing public. We're excited about next week's meeting. We are not only going to be able to bring forward for governing board consideration the potential $6.3 million award from the Department of Economic Security. We've got some great news we want to celebrate about the PIMA Early Education program for preschool expansion. So that is also on the docket next week. And then, of course, we've got an enrollment update on Tuva and Cole, the district's two premier online learning platforms. So some good stuff for next week's meeting.
Okay, thank you. All right, our meeting is adjourned. Thanks for tuning in and sticking with us. Have a good night.